Chapter 293. The old Taoist nodded. I've been afraid for a long time. Xiaoyao Temple is right next to the Green Dragon Stream. I told him to follow the stream to Mount Hui where the Dragon King River enters the Shi River, then keep going north until it reaches the Spring God Lake. We'll be getting closer and closer to Bailiang. I told him that your brother will come to Mount Longhu in autumn. Dragon Elephant will wait for you at the stream if he has nothing to do. Then he won't be afraid of the water anymore. Su Longxiang hit the water with his palm and a big fish was shaken out of the water. Its claws were like hooks. After catching the fish, he looked at his brother and grinned foolishly, as if he was asking for credit. Su Fengnian patted Huang Manor's head and shook his head. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Just eat some vegetarian food. Let the fish go. Huang Manor put the fainted fish back into the water, but it was eaten by a tiger kuei chasing after the bamboo raft. Su Fengnian suddenly asked, is there an old Taoist called Zhao Huangchao in Mount Longhu? A very old senior. Old Taoist Zhao Shituan thought for a while and shook his head. There are many century enlightened masters in seclusion on the mountain, but none of them are called Zhao Huangchao. The boats and rafts sailed up leisurely while the Xianyuan cruise ship turned around and returned to the Mount Hui pier. Xianyuan Qingfeng stood at the window of the cabin. His lips were livid and his body was trembling. It was hard to tell if he was scared or angry. She wasn't blind. Although her martial arts talent was mediocre, she had a good memory and was outstanding on Mount Hui. No matter how complicated the moves were, she would never forget them. To put it nicely, Mount Hui was a place where people from all walks of life accepted talents. To put it bluntly, it was a place where people of all walks of life lived together. The Xianyuan family had a rich collection of books. Other families and sects regarded them as treasures, but the aspiring tripod pavilion in Mount Hui had countless books. In terms of the number of books, it was only inferior to the tide listening pavilion in Bailiang. Yuan Tingshan said he wanted to marry her because he saw her as a shortcut to the peak of martial arts. Even if she couldn't enter the aspiring tripod pavilion, as long as Xianyuan Qingfeng personally taught her, all problems would be solved. How could Xianyuan Qingfeng not see how terrifying the yellow-skinned youth was? Perhaps in the entire Hui Mountain, there were no more than 10 people who could create such a huge commotion. If the invincible Vajra behind the youth was included, the number of people who could be counted on one hand. That was fine. This unfamiliar word made Xianyuan Qingfeng's heart tremble. After the spring and autumn period, although the title of crown prince had a tendency to spread in the dynasty, as long as one was a legitimate son of a noble family or a bastard son, they were qualified to hold this title. However, the title of crown prince became more and more precious. Only the princes and princesses of the imperial family could be called crown prince. In the southeast of the dynasty, according to the law, only the descendants of Zhao Yi, the crown prince of Guangling, could be considered crown prince. Zhao Yi had 3 sons and 6 daughters. The crown prince, Zhao Yu, hadn't been hereditary. Speaking of which, it was strange. It was probably due to the heavenly Tao's retribution that the lecherous Zhao Yi had snatched countless beauties. The 7 concubines who had broken the rules were all beautiful enough to captivate the birds and beasts. However, their children all resembled Zhao Yi. All of them had big heads and ears, and were as fat as pigs. They did not inherit the looks of the concubines at all. If that was the case, who was the fellow whom the Longhu Taoist addressed as Your Highness? There was no need to doubt the identity of Crown Prince. If he wasn't a descendant of a crown prince, who would dare to bring elite soldiers with him? Even the powerful Guangling Duke, Zhao Yi, would not hand over such information to the imperial court. His children leaving the duke's manor to play was even more relaxed than ordinary families. His surname was Su. Xianyuan Qingfeng's face was pale. After all, Xianyuan was one of the top aristocratic families and was well informed. She also heard that the eldest son of Su Shao, who had a different surname, traveled for 3 years before returning to Bailiang to avoid marrying into the crown prince's family. For some reason, he went out again this time. Not long ago, he caused trouble in Gangnam-do. Thousands of scholars from the Imperial College in the capital clamored for the emperor to issue an edict to Jiangnan. Otherwise, the country would be in chaos and the law would be against the law. Unfortunately, the butcher who took away the title of pillar of the country was still favored by the emperor and protected his royal highness. As long as the king of Bailiang was in the capital, no official above the 4th rank dared to impeach him. Only the scholars of the Imperial College wrote tearful letters in blood, which made them a joke. Xianyuan Qingfeng still remembered the arrogance of the Bailiang cavalry under Mount Longhu when the older generation of Mount Hui talked about it. At that time, it wasn't because of her family's righteousness, but because after the iron hooves flattened Mount Longhu, they were intimately interdependent. Xianyuan also didn't have a good ending, so she had to bite the bullet and stand with the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu. If it really was the crown prince of Bailiang, what should she do? It was fine if she had to swallow this anger, but if that beggar turned into Crown Prince Su came to Mount Hui to denounce her, how would her family deal with it? Her father was cowardly and would definitely be too scared to argue. Because of her father's decline in power, the other branches wouldn't hit him when he was down. Her family originally wanted to marry her to Zhao Yi's 6 sons, but because of Song Kelly's arrival, there was a slight silence. Once her uncle Xianyuan smelled the opportunity, how could he show mercy? Who didn't know that this uncle had openly teased her mother, saying, "The dumplings are delicious, but not as delicious as sister-in-law." Her father only knew how to study behind closed doors, so how could he say anything about it? Was there a lack of such jokes? Xianyuan Qingfeng walked out of the cabin in a daze when the boat docked. A lone boat shot over. An old Confucian scholar with white hair flew across the river and landed at the bow of the boat. The boat was filled with spiritual energy as it slowly approached the riverbank. Seeing the only old man in her family who cared about her, Xianyuan Qingfeng's eyes welled up with tears. The old man with an ancient sword at his waist said kindly, "Who dares to bully my granddaughter? Which family's brat is it? Grandpa will teach him a lesson for you." Xianyuan Qingfeng lowered his head and didn't say anything. The old man smiled and said, "It can't be the crown prince of Bailiang who went to Zhenzhou, right? This is going to be troublesome." Xianyuan Qingfeng raised his head, his face full of shock. The old man who returned from the Donglue sword pool was Xuanyuan's national weapon. Rumor had it that he could ride a sword for 100 feet and decapitate someone. His sword skills were outstanding in the southeast. Even the Donglue sword pool, whose sword skills were second only to the Wu family's sword tomb, saw him as their #1 threat. The old man said proudly, "So what if he's the crown prince of Bailiang? Can he bully my granddaughter? I'd like to see if that one-armed Li Chungang can still open the gates of heaven with his sword." Chapter 294. I'll update tomorrow. 3 guaranteed, 4 guaranteed. They could already see the Shaoyao temple by the Green Dragon stream. The big boat and the bamboo raft slowly docked together. Before getting off the raft, Wang Manor bent down and turned to look at Su Fengnian, indicating that he wanted to carry his brother. Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. The old Taoist Zhao Shituan felt a little sad. The Zhongding family was cold-blooded. There were several brothers who loved each other so much. Thinking about it carefully, the Su family had few male descendants. The second son, Su Longxiang, was born mentally retarded. Of course, the 2 princesses were destined to be married off. In this way, the Bailiang palace would not leave any room for outsiders to interfere in the succession. Anyway, the eldest son, Su Fengnian, would be the heir. No matter how idle His Royal Highness was, there was no suspense. On the other hand, the Zhao family is the first Taoist master's residence in the South Kingdom. Although there is an ancestral rule that only Zhao can be a Taoist master, Qi Xuanzhen suppressed the Taoist master's residence 50 years ago. Now, in the Jing generation, there is Mr. White Lotus in immortality and Qi Xianxia in martial arts. They are all outsiders. No matter if it is fated chances or Taoist spells, the Zhao family can't compete with them at all. During these years, they have been scheming against each other. If the Taoist master's residence didn't worry about the strength of the main branch, Zhao Danping wouldn't have become the ridiculous prime minister. Zhao Shituan sighed worriedly. A group of people walked along the bluestone path to the Shaoyao temple. In the past, the old Taoist master lived alone in the Taoist temple, so there was no such path. After Su Longxiang went up the mountain, the old and the young had nothing to do, so they paved the path. Zhao Shituan hesitated for a moment and approached the old man wearing a sheepskin fur coat. He smiled and said in a low voice, "Old Li, how have you been?" The old god of swords snorted. Li Chungang had visited Longhu twice in his life, and both times, he met Zhao Shituan, who was about the same age as him. As a result, he was pestered by Zhao Shituan. The first time, it was Zhao Shituan who led him to the devil-slaying platform. Li Chungang did not have a bad impression of this guy, who was highly regarded by both the old Taoist master and Qi Xuanzhen. Everyone in the Taoist master's residence was as old-fashioned as clay statues, with neither immortal nor human aura. Li Chungang had already scolded them for being neither human nor ghost. He remembered that the first time he went down the mountain, this Taoist master's residence finally had an unrestrained young Taoist, who insisted on following him to Jianghu for several months. Zhao Shituan Taoist master said shamelessly, "Old Li, my kung fu is far worse than yours." Li Chungang thought of Jiang Ni and his own difficulties in accepting a disciple. His Achilles heel was poked and he was furious. He pointed at Su Fengnian and glared at Zhao Shituan. "Look, my new disciple. Even if Su Longxiang becomes invincible in the future, do you think he can beat this old man's disciple?" Old Taoist Zhao was angry at first. Back then, when the Taoist nuns on the mountain heard that Li Chungang had come to the mountain, they all rushed to the devil-slaying platform like crazy, screaming as if they had seen an immortal descending to the mortal world. Zhao Shituan thought that when he was young, he was also very handsome. Although Li Chunggang's kung fu was a little higher than his, he was a little more handsome, and he was a little more famous. This group of women who were supposed to be pure and devoted to the Yellow Court would not be so crazy. However, at that time, Li Chungang held his sword and came with an unparalleled momentum. Zhao Shituan was not convinced. Until today, it was not that old Taoist Zhao thought that he could beat old Li in a fight, but when it came to competing with disciples, Zhao Shituan was confident that no one dared to jump out and compete with him. But no matter how much he thought about it, he did not expect Elder Li to bring up His Highness the Crown Prince. The old Taoist was immediately discouraged. There was no way to compare. Even if Su Longxiang was really ruthless and dared to drag Wang Xianji down, how could he be unreasonable to His Highness the Crown Prince? Li Chungang was in a good mood when he saw that Zhao Shituan was defeated. He patted Zhao Shituan's shoulder and comforted him. Maybe Su Longxiang is the reincarnation of Zhenwu Great Emperor. Such a good thing hasn't happened for at least 700 or 800 years. You're lucky to have picked up such a good deal. Old Sword God changed the topic and said with a smile, "Now that you have a beautiful wife, you should be happy in your bed. If you dare to show off in front of this old man, Zhao Shituan, who had once roamed the Jianghu with the god of swords Li Chungang in the same era, immediately saw the wind and said flatteringly, "Brother Li, you're treating me like an outsider. We've been friends for decades." Li Chungang said bluntly, "Don't try to worm your way into being friends with this old man. We don't have any friendship." Zhao Shituan sighed with a melancholy expression. He was too embarrassed to stick his warm face to old Li's cold butt. He turned to look at the troops brought by His Royal Highness. Other than old Li and 100 light cavalry, as well as a few personal retainers who could be considered top-notch in martial arts, there was no other force to be used. Looking at the signs, they did not intend to stir up trouble in Mount Longhu. This was a good thing. Otherwise, he would be stuck in the middle of both sides and would be in a dilemma. While Zhao Shituan was muttering to himself, he caught a glimpse of the three women in curtained hats. Then he saw the maid in green and the beauty holding the cat behind His Highness the Crown Prince. They all had the style of immortal women. The old Taoist pondered over His Highness the Crown Prince's good fortune. In the southeast, only old man Xianyuan, who enjoyed the good fortune of the land alone, and Prince Guangling, Zhao Yi, who collected beauties from all over the world, could compare. Su Fingnian walked to the door of the Taoist temple and stopped. Zhao Shituan's expression was ugly. He admitted that he was in the wrong. It was not easy to trick Su Longxiang from Beiliang to Mount Longhu, but in the end, he was cultivating in this dilapidated Taoist temple. He was really embarrassed. Just as he was thinking about how to explain to His Royal Highness, Su Fingnian, who had never treated the old Taoist master as an expert, slowly turned around and faced Zhao Shituan, bowing deeply. Zhao Shituan was flustered. He was pleasantly surprised, but also fearful and restrained. He hurriedly helped him up and said, "I don't deserve such courtesy from your highness. It's too much." Chapter 295. The old god of swords looked on coldly from the sidelines. He was still a little surprised in his heart. Li Chungang, who had experienced many hardships, had long since figured out Su Fingnian's temperament. Now that he had bowed so openly and sincerely, it could be considered that he had given Zhao Shituan and Mount Longhu enough face. Otherwise, given Su Fingnian's stubborn personality, he would have fought to the death even if he had provoked some king of Jing'an, Zhaoheng, or some scholarly group of Gangnam-do. Yu Yuwei held Wu Mingyang between her breasts. The white cat was comfortably pretending to be asleep and half awake. Occasionally, it would use its furry head to rub its perky bosom. Princess Jing'an did not know Zhao Shituan's identity, but she guessed from the scene that this foolish youth was Su Fingnian's younger brother, the future prince of Beiliang. She could not imagine that the two brothers of the Marquis clan could get along so well. As for why the young prince was cultivating with a sloppy old Taoist in a shabby monastery at the foot of Mount Longhu, Pei Nanwei did not bother to make wild guesses. What shocked Zhao Shituan even more was the following scene. After His Royal Highness bowed with his hands clasped, the White Horse Cavalry, led by Ningame, gripped the hilts of their Beiliang sabers with their right hands and crossed their left arms before their chests. They took a step back in unison as a sign of respect. Everyone knew that the Beiliang cavalry were the best in the world, arrogant because of their proficiency in battle. During the Spring and Autumn War, when they traveled with Gu Jiantang and the other vassal armies, they always took the lead and no one dared to cut in. Throughout the Spring and Autumn War, only once did the Beiliang army give way to a scholar-led brigade that achieved great merit. Within the Northern Liang army, this tradition had always been passed down. Those who did not have great military exploits would have to give way to those who had great military exploits. Even if it was a military officer with a high military rank, he would have to give way to those who had great military exploits. For example, the scouts who accumulated their reputation by killing the barbarians' heads, even if they were just low-level armored soldiers, in Beiliang's military towns, even if they ran into border officials at the level of county governor, they could still advance on the official road without getting off their horses or bending down. Zhao Shituan sighed inwardly. His Royal Highness had changed. It was a good thing for him, but it might not be a good thing for Mount Longhu, especially the Celestial Master residence. The old Taoist brought the group into the Taoist temple with mixed feelings. Su Fingnian, who was sitting beside the secluded ancient well with Su Longxiang, smiled and said, "Old Celestial Master, please help me arrange the Phoenix Battalion." Zhao Shituan nodded and said, "There's no need for your highness to say anything. Mount Longhu will naturally make the appropriate arrangements." Su Fingnian joked, "I heard that this Taoist ancestral temple, Yuzhang Qinglin, was imposing, and that the East sect was like the Heavenly Gate." Old celestial master, your temple is deserted to a whole new level. Zhao Shituan blushed with shame and smiled. My social relations are poor. There's nothing I can do about it. I've made His Royal Highness laugh. Su Fingnian waved his hand and said, in any case, Wang Man doesn't care about this. I see that he's quite happy here. It's not any worse than when he was in Bailiang Palace. Isn't that right, Wang Man? Su Longxiang grinned foolishly. On this side, they kept talking about His Highness, Bailiang, and the old celestial master. The authorities were calm and indifferent, accustomed to it. As a result, the Murong siblings, who were outside the situation and were kept in the dark, were greatly frightened. Although Murong Tongwang had long expected that Su Fingnian's identity was very special, no matter how he thought about it, he felt that being able to rank with Chu Lushan in the front line was already extremely shocking. For the remnants of the spring and autumn period, specifically in the provincial capital, the most unforgettable thing for the Bailiang army was undoubtedly the ghost city of Xiangfan, which had been completely massacred after the city was breached. There was also Jianzhou, where the Western Lady sat. Longhu and Xianyuan faced each other from east to west. How could they forget the humiliation brought by the Bailiang's iron armor? Murong Wuzhu was in high spirits. She was overjoyed when she mistakenly thought that she had caught a thin straw in the wind and waves, only to discover that it was a towering tree. It was like she had accidentally fallen in love with a poor scholar, only to find out that the scholar was the heir of a wealthy family after eloping with him. Murong Tongwang could not help but tremble. His face was flushed, and he stared at His Royal Highness with a complicated expression. Other than the master of the Wudong Palace, who in the world was the most feared figure in the world by Jiangdong and Xianyuan? It was Bailiang. Su Shao, the butcher of Jianghu. Blue Bird and Yu Wei went to the Taoist temple to clean up the house. Pei Nanwei had to lower her head under the eaves. Most of the time, she was no different from a maid. She had already accepted her fate. Ningame and the others were taken to the nearby Taoist temple by the old Taoist master Zhao Shituan. The old god of swords went to take a walk by the green dragon stream alone. In the end, only the brothers and siblings with different identities were left in the courtyard. Su Fingnian touched Wang Man's head and glanced at Murong Tongwang, who was looking straight at him. Murong Wuzhu was peeping at His Royal Highness, but soon he lowered his head and looked at his feet. His Royal Highness said calmly, "You finally know my identity." Murong Tongwang bit his lips. Su Fingnian smiled and said, "Did you pee in your pants?" Murong Tongwang was stunned. Su Fingnian smiled and said, "If Wen Hua was here, he would definitely say that I peed in my pants." Murong Wuzhu did not feel disgusted when he heard such frivolous words. He just felt unbearably shy. His ears and neck were red, and he did not dare to look at His Royal Highness, who had a prominent identity. Murong Tongwang could still hold on and looked at Su Fingnian from beginning to end. Su Fingnian thought for a while and said with a naughty smile, "I do have a little grudge with the Xianyuan family, but don't think that you can just watch the flood leisurely. When the time comes, you will go to the bull gang to discuss the Xianyuan family. I'll have to trouble you and your brother to cooperate and act closer to me." Murong Wuzhu quietly raised his head and quickly lowered it. Murong Tongwang asked straightforwardly, "Are you really the Prince of Bailiang? The eldest son of the King of Bailiang?" Su Fingnian nodded and said, "Otherwise, would I dare to use 100 light cavalry to slaughter 20 Xianyuan cavalry?" Murong Tongwang smiled. Sure enough, he was more charming than a woman. He slowly walked toward His Royal Highness. Su Fingnian quickly raised his hand and said with a frown, "Don't do this, I can't stand it. How can I be looked at by a man?" "Fine, when we go to Mount Hui, your sister will be the only one to suffer. Let's make it clear in advance that I am taking advantage of you. There is no room for discussion. However, if you shamelessly snuggle up to me, I will always feel that you are taking advantage of me." both of us will have goosebumps. Murong Wuzhu covered her mouth and let out a soft and light laugh. Murong Tonghuang was stunned and turned around. Murong Wuzhu were laughing and crying. Perhaps to an outsider, it was just a crying and laughing scene, but to the Murong siblings, it was 10 years of bitterness and sorrow. Su Fingnian said calmly, "Don't be in a hurry to be grateful. The reason why I helped you is because I feel that you are pitiful. Of course, if you feel that you can't repay me, you can also repay me with your body." Murong Wuzhu plucked up her courage and looked at him in a daze. Su Fingnian smiled, but soon, he couldn't smile anymore. Murong Tonghuang, who had tears on his cheeks, turned his head and asked, "Can't I?" Su Fingnian had the intention to kill. He made a chopping gesture and said angrily, "Murong Tonghuang, if you dare to discuss me again, I will chop off that part of yours. When we go to Wudong Palace in the capital, I guarantee that you will be justified." Su Fingnian's heart skipped a beat as he recalled the prophetic ballad. Overturning a country. Could this guy really do something that millions of soldiers from the 8 countries couldn't do? Chapter 296. Chapter 1. Su Fingnian had just asked Murong Xiongzhu if she had been scared to the point of wetting herself. Soon, he was frightened by his own thoughts. Those beauties with elegant clothes beside the emperor in the smoke of spring and autumn, no matter if they were the empress who had caused the emperor's relatives to rise to power or the concubines who had seduced the emperor, they were nothing more than scapegoats. The scholars who had lost their country and were loyal to the former emperor did not dare or did not know to get to the bottom of the matter. They could not see the root of the problem and could only use poems and articles to vent their anger on those beautiful women. They used the excuse that demons and monsters had come into being. In the eyes of discerning people, it was absurd and unreasonable. Murong Tonghuang was a beautiful young man who could not even defeat the Xinyuan family. How could he collapse a prosperous dynasty? Su Fingnian, who had come back to his senses, laughed at himself. The imperial harem had Zhao Ji as the mother of the country. This empress's iron fist was not inferior to that of a famous general. No matter what, there would not be chaos. In the capital, there was that emperor who was adept at controlling all factions and parties. Inside, there was the empress who was recognized as virtuous to take care of the inner chamber. Outside, there were civil and military officials and generals who looked at all directions. What a big iron bucket of country! The thin-skinned and shallow Murong Wuzhu was short of breath. She carefully sized up this young man whom she had only known for a dozen years. His Royal Highness in Beiliang. How high was his official position? Murong Wuzhu did not understand these things. She only occasionally heard some bad comments about Beiliang when she was socializing with the scholars of Jianzhou. They said that the king of Beiliang was a tyrannical executioner who had killed the most people in the dynasty. He used to like slaughtering cities. As for the eldest son, he was very foppish. He could not write or fight. He only knew how to bully good women in Beiliang. Sooner or later, he would lose the family property and was not worth mentioning. No matter how simple Murong Wuzhu was, she knew that seeing was believing. First impressions were the strongest. She had a good impression of Su Fingnian who had saved her and her brother. Under the premise that he was in control of their lives, he could resist the temptation and did not bully them. This was 100 times better than those aristocratic scholars who were full of benevolence, righteousness, and morality but secretly had obscene eyes. She was so simple. In the past, she had accepted her fate to be captured and played by ancestor Xinyuan. Now, she accepted her fate to warm the bed for His Royal Highness one day. Murong Wuzhu looked at the handsome face. Even if she took 1,000 steps back, he was very good-looking when he was young, wasn't he? Among the siblings, Murong Tonghuang, who was the one who made the decision since childhood, saw the look in his sister's eyes and felt helpless. Su Fingnian was extremely disgusted with the scholarly men's penchant for cutting off their sleeves. Of course, he kept a respectful distance from Murong Tongwang. However, he quite liked this guy's unscrupulous ruthlessness in order to achieve his goal. He was truly ruthless if he dared to be ruthless to himself. If a man could endure the disgust and throw flirtatious glances at another man, he would be unlucky to be born in a small family. If he was given a bigger stage, he would be good at dancing. Since Murong Tonghuang's words and actions were straightforward, Su Fengnian couldn't disappoint him. He gently kicked away the tiger Kuei King Kong who was biting his robe and said with a smile, "If you want to use Belyang's tiger skin as a banner to intimidate others, you don't need to hide it. Since I've eaten my fill and have nothing better to do, I won't be so shameless. However, I'll say the ugly words first. At least we're in the same camp now. Don't stab me in the back and think about giving Mount Hui a proof of your allegiance. We can't let you and your sister take all the good things." Murong Tongwang nodded and said gloomily, "After we stepped out of the family, we didn't think about going to the Xianyuan family to live an ignoble existence. However, since His Royal Highness said so, I also hope that Your Highness won't use us to win over Mount Hui. If so..." Su Fengnian waved his hand and shook his head. "Then you're underestimating me, Su Fengnian." Murong Wuzhu whispered softly, "Su Fengnian." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "Isn't the name nice? A phoenix won't perch unless it's a parasol tree. You two are quite fated, right? My courtyard in Bailiang Palace is called Parasol Garden. If you have the chance, you can go there and play. Don't worry, I really don't have any thoughts about you two. I also feel that it's a waste of saliva to keep talking about this. In the future, don't be on guard against this. Do you see the big sister holding the white cat? I like her. If we're talking about her face and smooth skin, then big sister Pei, or Aunt Pei, who wears the veil hat with you two, is definitely more outstanding than you two. You two are guarding against me like you're guarding against a thief. It's very hurtful." Murong Wuzhu giggled. As a result, she was glared at by Murong Tonghuang, but this time, she didn't shrink back for the first time. Su Fengnian looked at Murong Tonghuang and said helplessly, "You can't protect your sister for the rest of her life. She has to get married and take care of the family alone. When that time comes, don't tell me that you're still following behind your sister. Aren't you afraid that your future brother-in-law will dislike you for being an eyesore?" Murong Tonghuang coldly snorted and said, "That'll have to wait until she finds that kind of man. Once she finds that kind of man, it's fine even if she wants me to die." Chapter 297. Su Fengnian was speechless. He could only turn around and smile at Huang Manor. In the next few days, His Royal Highness unexpectedly did not go to the Taoist Master Mansion, nor did he go to the Mount Hui Gang. He stayed at Xiaoyao Temple obediently. He would either ask the old god of swords about the flaws in his life-saving saber techniques or ask the old Taoist master about the essence of the talismans in Mount Longhu. Especially the latter, he rarely met a junior at the foot of the mountain who was willing to let His Royal Highness enjoy being his master. He told him everything he knew. During this period, he especially went to the library at the top of the mountain and brought down many Taoist cloud talisman secret scriptures. The old and the young talked until dawn. Probably because he was afraid that His Royal Highness would say that he did not know anything, Xiao Shituan even picked up a few talisman incantations that were feared by ordinary Taoists. While he was cramming, he explained the mysteries to His Royal Highness. It should be known that Xiao Shituan was very talented when he was young. Unfortunately, he had the same problem as the Xianyuan Great Plate. In every field, he did not ask for in-depth knowledge. After being provoked by His Royal Highness, he gritted his teeth and even piled the extremely obscure book of Taishang Jingyi Dongxian Law Collection on the table. On this day, Su Fengnian finally stopped strolling around at the foot of the mountain. He pulled Huang Man'er, called Murong Wuzhu, and Murong Tongwang to go to the back of the mountain behind a Taoist temple. Only Qing Niao followed them, holding a bamboo basket. Murong Wuzhu was probably careless that day, but after confiding in His Highness, who was wearing a tiger skin, she was much more at ease than her younger brother. She softly asked, "Your Highness, what are you doing?" Huang Manor said honestly, "Picking hawthorns." Su Fingyan nodded and smiled. "When the old Taoist master went to Beiliang to take my brother as a closed-door disciple, he talked for a long time but did not get to the point. Only hawthorns are more pleasing to Huang Manor." Murong Wuzhu felt that this was unimaginable. Su Fingyan picked a hillside and sat down. Huang Manor came and went like the wind. One handful of hawthorn after another, he quickly filled up the small bamboo basket. Blue Bird simply placed the bamboo basket on the ground. Murong Wuzhu was still at a lively age, so she went to pick the hawthorn with Blue Bird. Su Fingyan and Murong Tongwang were sitting at a distance from each other, while the two tiger kuei were rolling all over the mountain. A cool breeze brushed past his face. Su Fingyan closed his eyes and concentrated. He stroked the overlapping spring thunder-embroidered winter and let his imagination run wild. The stones of other mountains could be used to improve jade. Even with the help of the 9 bushels of rice Wei Shuyang, it was still difficult to study the cloud pattern of the Fujiang red armor. However, after the guidance of the old Taoist master Zhao Shituan, many of the obstacles were easily killed by the sloppy old Taoist who knew the secrets of heaven. This made him suddenly enlightened. The only pity was that he lacked a Buddhist monk who knew the secret. Otherwise, Su Fingyan was confident that he could completely turn the Fujiang red armor into something in his pocket. Murong Tongwang asked softly, "I heard that your Royal Highness killed many scholars in Gangnam-do." Su Fingyan said calmly, "Compared to Su Shao, it's still much less." Murong Tongwang frowned. "Why do you want to go against scholars? Don't you know that public opinion can confuse gold and make you and your father go down in history and infamy?" Su Fingyan wiped the spring thunder with his slender fingers and said slowly, "The winner takes all. Think about it, the history books of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn were all written by the historians of the Liang dynasty. For those who wanted their ancestors to be known as loyal ministers, even if they only left a dozen words for their descendants, they would not hesitate to become officials in the new imperial court. For those who wanted their fathers not to be known as traitorous ministers, they would even rush to the capital and rack their brains to please the Hanlin emperor. They would cry and shout, wishing that they could present their wives and concubines with both hands. Isn't there a ridiculous story of someone who asked his wife to take off her clothes to warm his hands with her breasts? Murong Tongwang said seriously, "Your Royal Highness, you can't generalize." Su Fingyan opened his eyes and said calmly, "I understand this. It's not that Su Shao didn't admire scholars from the bottom of his heart, but it seems that not many of them had a good ending. Sun Ping of Hezhou, who submitted the 21 treatises on governance, was cooked by the people. Zhao Guangling vomited blood and died in the military tent outside the West Shu imperial city. Li Shan, who used to be a judge of civil and military affairs, was killed by some literary giants who were also scholars. He was implicated and finally escaped to Su Zhao's side to survive. Of course, you can continue to say that this is a generalization. However, as a member of the Northern Liang Mansion, I have seen the graceful bearing of many famous people. Indeed, they can write beautiful poems. Regardless of whether it is killing with words or singing praises, they are all top-notch. Fame and fortune, fame and fortune. Do you know why the name comes before the word fortune? Saint Zhang of the North once said that there were 3 immortals. The first was to establish virtue, the second was to establish one's words, and the third was to establish merit. This was the answer, and also the basis of why scholars look down on martial artists. How many scholars went to establish virtue? Studying back and forth, the most they did was to establish their words. Establishing one's words, accumulating one's character, earning fame, bringing honor to one's ancestors, leaving one's name in the annals of history, how could they care about the people's hunger and hunger? Su Fingnian said softly, when I was in Gangnam-do Baogwa Temple, I heard the famous scholars of Jiangnan talk about righteousness and profit. In the end, it was just a poor scholar who originally didn't have the qualifications to enter the banquet who sought profit for the people. What kind of scholars do you think those famous scholars are? They only know how to recite the wind, the flower, the snow and the moon, talk about profound mysteries, and if the whole world applauds, is it really good? Reading 10,000 books, there's no book that you don't read, no scriptures that you don't understand. Don't you know that there is a frozen bone outside the Vermilion Gate? Is that a scholar? Su Fingnian laughed and said, you might not believe it, but after Xiang Fan Confucian Wang Yangming committed suicide, he was originally at the top of the list of traitorous officials. It was Su Xiao who had a quarrel with the old Grand Secretary, rolled up his sleeves and personally cut it off. And the history books of West Chu did not leave half a word about this scholar who once sat alone on the fishing platform for West Chu for 10 whole years. This time, it was the old leader of the imperial court, West Chu's old Grand Preceptor Sun Shiji, who personally erased it. Murong Tong Wang was still persisting, but he was no longer as confident as he was at the beginning. Lowering his head, he said, scholars are still mostly good people. Su Fingnian said self-deprecatingly, I didn't say that I have to make life difficult for scholars. Besides, there are a lot of people and things that have no right or wrong to speak of. If we get into a dead end and insist on either one or the other, then there's no reason to speak of. Murong Tong Wang grunted. Su Fingnian propped his chin on his hand and looked toward the bowl, the gang. He muttered to himself, that kid Wenhua is still open-minded. I wonder where he is right now. Murong Tong Wang was in a daze, lost in thought. Su Fingnian turned his head and stretched out 2 fingers. Imitating the Taoist priests of the charm and spell sect who subdued demons and exorcised devils, he pointed at Murong Tong Wang. Laughing heartily, he joked, urgent as the law commands, you evil creature who brings disaster to the country and the people, why haven't you shown yourself yet? Chapter 298. Chapter 2. Murong Tong Wang hesitated for a moment and hammered His Royal Highness's chest with all his might. At this moment, he no longer pretended to be seductive and charming, nor was he gloomy. Instead, he exuded an unfamiliar aura of awe-inspiring heroism. Su Fingnian lay on the slope and said with a smile, Chen Yu, who is ranked second in the Rouge ranking, is said to not lose to Nangong. Do you know that? Murong Tong Wang nodded, but he was confused as to why Meng Qi mentioned Chen Yu and Nangong. Su Fingnian said with a smile, that Nangong is the same as you. He is a man with a white fox face. He is even more good-looking than you. Now he is reading secret manuals in the tide-listening pavilion of Bailiang Palace. When he comes out of the pavilion, he might be the number 1 in the world. These 2 sabers of mine, Spring Thunder and Embroidered Winter, were originally his. Later, I gave one to him and borrowed the other. Murong Tong Wang laughed and said, if you continue to explain, be careful that you don't say that you are trying to hide 300 taels of silver. Su Fingnian felt relieved. There were thousands of knots in his heart. If he could help this pair of siblings untie one by one, he would deal with the mess of the Xianyuan family. As for Murong Tong Wang's life, he only needed to lay down some foreshadowing. After that, he would no longer pay attention to him. He really needed to learn from that old monster Huang Sanja to play chess. Regardless of whether he was drawing a tiger or a dog, he needed to learn first. Su Fingnian suddenly thought of the celestial being from Mount Longhu, Xiao Huangchao, who came by dragon in his dream. This Xiao was not the Zhao from the Zhao family of the Taoist master mansion. Su Fingnian still had not figured out whether it was a dream or reality. If it was the truth, why didn't Miss Hehe, who was climbing the cliff all night long, respond? Even the old god of swords, Li Chungang, did not notice it. However, if you were to treat it as a dream, then everything the white python told the black dragon and the middle-aged Taoist priest, Xiao Huangchao, said was reasonable and well-founded, especially the bearded heavenly dragon that rose from the cliff. It was almost exactly the same as the one in the evil spring thunder flood dragon painting. This painting of the heavenly king and the heavenly maiden came from the hands of a great chi practitioner and was supplemented by an ominous prophecy. Su Fengnian frowned. For the time being, he did not dare to mention this strange matter to anyone. Perhaps he would only be able to mention it to Su Shao and Li Shan once he returned to Beiliang. His Royal Highness didn't know that not long ago, someone had coincidentally arrived at Mount Insignia. Xianyuan Qingfeng and his grandfather, Xianyuan Guiqi, were standing on the Wangjiang terrace of the aspiring cauldron pavilion. The two of them were leaning against the railing. The aspiring cauldron pavilion was built against the cliff, while the Wangjiang terrace was abrupt. The mountain wind was blowing, and it was very cold at the top. Xianyuan Qingfeng pulled the collar of his fur coat. The old man with white hair on his temples smiled and said, "Are you cold? You mischievous girl. You're just like your father. Both of you are unwilling to work hard on the path of martial arts. Practicing martial arts doesn't necessarily mean you have to fight and kill. Strengthening your body is fundamental." Xianyuan Qingfeng's cheeks were flushed from the strong wind from the river to the wall of Bull Mound. He shrunk his neck and said coquettishly, "It's not too late to learn now." Xianyuan Guiqi, who had an ancient sword hanging from his waist, smiled but didn't say anything. The old man was the only son of Xianyuan of Mount Insignia's generation. After his ancestor, Xianyuan Great Plate, suffered defeat after defeat, he went into seclusion to cultivate. It was Xianyuan Guiqi who single-handedly supported him. When he was young, he was a nobody. He missed the opportunity to fight Li Chungang, the god of swords, who was known as the invincible god of swords. It was only in the recent 20 years that he rose to fame. His first battle after leaving the mountain was the toughest Wu family's sword tomb as a whetstone, forcing the Wu family's Su of Gojoseon to unsheath his sword. Although Xianyuan Guiqi was defeated, it was still a glorious defeat. He was praised by the martial arts world as a late bloomer. All the friends he had made over the years were old. Not long ago, he went to the Dongyue sword pool and defeated 6 sword puppets with 1 strike. His reputation was right behind Dong Tai's. Xianyuan Guiqi said softly, "I heard that Li Chungang is by the side of the crown prince of Beiliang." The old man flicked the scabbard with his finger, and the ancient sword in the scabbard hummed, even louder than the whistling of the mountain wind. However, Xianyuan Qingfeng did not react at all. The old man sneered and said, "Li Chungang used to be a sword immortal. When did he become a lackey of the Beiliang? How disappointing. I wanted to find this sword Dao Senior to spar with him after I returned from the sword pool. Although it's convenient now, I don't know if Li Chungang is worthy of unsheathing the plain sword." Xianyuan Qingfeng smiled and said, "A starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Isn't that old man the 8th? Xianyuan Guiqi smiled indifferently and said, "Girl, don't try to goad me. Do you know that once one's sword Dao realm regresses, the difficulty of advancing again, especially for an expert at Li Chunggang's realm, is comparable to ascension? As long as he's not a first-stage sword immortal, your grandfather can fight him. If this 8th rank is real gold and silver, then that's fine. But if it's only because of Li Chunggang's unparalleled heroic figure that they gave him a title, then I might as well expose this fig leaf. The former sword god without the wooden horse and 1 arm being defeated by the plain embracing sword is better than being used as a stepping stone by those young people." Xianyuan Qingfeng was about to say something when the old man waved his hand and said, "Girl, go first. Don't catch a cold from the wind. That bookish father of yours is going to nag me for a month or so." Xianyuan Qingfeng left the aspiring cauldron pavilion with a gloomy expression. How could one survive in the Xianyuan clan where martial arts fanatics gathered? Xianyuan Qingfeng walked in the pavilion. There were bookshelves on both sides, and her slender hand slowly touched the secret manuals arranged according to the pronunciation of the first word. Her eyes were dull. The ancient books that her fingers touched were all martial arts secret manuals that Jianghu dreamed of. She had read most of them and memorized them in her mind. Because she knew that once she got married, she would no longer be allowed to enter the aspiring cauldron pavilion, even if it was to find a son-in-law. Therefore, she had been painstakingly memorizing the contents of the secret manuals all these years, page after page, book after book, hoping that she could find a man she could rely on in the future to revitalize the first wife's branch whose spirit had been sapped by her scholarly father and restore the glory of a great sect. After walking out of the aspiring cauldron pavilion, Xianyuan Qingfeng's face was filled with determination. An old woman who had taken care of Xianyuan Qingfeng since she was young hurriedly ran over and whispered, "Miss, Yuan Tingshan is back. There are signs of him being seriously injured and dying." Xianyuan Qingfeng calmly asked, "Can he be saved?" The old woman shook her head and said, "Using normal methods, he'll definitely die." Xianyuan Qingfeng stood there in a daze, as if her soul had left her body. The old woman said sympathetically, "Miss, if Yuan Tingshan dies, then so be it. Just find another young man and nurture him with all your heart." Xianyuan Qingfeng's lips turned pale as she murmured, "There's no chance for that." She suddenly turned around and walked past countless bookshelves in the pavilion to the Riverview Terrace. With a plop, she knelt down behind Xianyuan Guiqi. The old man, who had mastered qi cultivation, remained silent and didn't ask anything. Xianyuan Qingfeng put her hands and knees on the bone-chilling green jade floor and said in a low voice, "Grandpa, please save Yuan Tingshan's life." Xianyuan Guiqi said something that others couldn't understand. If you want to have the ability to humiliate others, you must first have the ability to humiliate yourself. Xianyuan Qingfeng's body began to tremble more and more violently. In the end, she lay on the ground, feeling as if a knife was twisting in her heart. She sobbed and said, "Grandpa, why did the great ancestor choose me for dual cultivation? Why? As long as Grandpa can save Yuan Tingshan, as long as Yuan Tingshan can withstand 10 strikes from the great ancestor, Qingfeng won't have to be a bull anymore." Xianyuan Guiqi shook his head. A middle-aged Confucian scholar who resembled Xianyuan Guiqi walked into the Riverview Terrace while coughing. His hair was tied up in a bun, and he held the forbidden thunder mantra of virtue in one hand and covered his mouth with the other. After releasing his hand, he put his hand behind his back, leaving behind a pool of blood. Xianyuan Guiqi was slightly angry. "Jingqing, since you're not well, don't walk around." Xianyuan Jingqing said bitterly, "Life and death are predestined. Just accept your fate." Xianyuan Guiqi, who had his back to the father and daughter, waved his sleeve. Clearly, he was quite angry. Xianyuan Jingqing took the Taoist book from his bloody hand and held it tightly. He bent down, freeing his hand to support his daughter. Xianyuan Qingfeng's limbs were already weak, but at this moment, a surge of strength surged up and she threw her father's hand away. She cried and cursed, "You don't deserve it." The eldest grandson of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Jingqing, had a bitter expression on his face. He said softly, "Let's go. Your mother has warmed a pot of Angelica wine for you to warm your stomach." Xianyuan Qingfeng stood up shakily and staggered out of the Wangjiang terrace, leaving Xianyuan Jingqing with a resolute and desolate back view. Xianyuan Guiqi was angry at his son's lack of struggle and lamented his misfortune. He raised his voice and reprimanded, "Look at you. Back then, in order to marry a loose woman who could be anyone's wife, you disgraced the family. What have you been doing all these years?" Xianyuan Jingqing said calmly, "Reading. Reading the spring and autumn annals of righteousness. Reading Taoism without action. Reading Buddhism with compassion." Xianyuan Jingqing said word by word, neither warm nor angry. His tone was extremely slow. Indeed, if it wasn't for his gentle temperament, how could he have endured 20 years of supercilious suppression? The other 2 branches were already riding on top of his head to shit and piss, but this scholar never uttered a word, only reading his book. Jingqing wants to let the ancestor know that his so-called understanding of the three religions is bullshit. T. Xianyuan Jingqing walked to the railing and stood side by side with Xianyuan Guiqi. Xianyuan Guiqi was so angry that his eyebrows were twitching. He wanted to slap this good-for-nothing son of his to death. Xianyuan Jingqing smiled. He held the forbidden thunder spell of virtue tightly. Blood seeped into the pages. He said, "Since I can't become an immortal Zhenren, shut up. You disgraceful thing." Xianyuan Guiqi slapped his son's face and walked away. Obviously, if this middle-aged scholar was allowed to continue, his words would only shock people to death. Xianyuan Jingqing, who was slapped, was indifferent. He looked at Longhu. Logically speaking, with the strength of Xianyuan Guiqi's hand, even if he restrained it, the slap on Xianyuan Jingqing's face would not disappear in a flash. When there was no one left in the Wending Pavilion, he threw out the forbidden thunder spell of virtue and leaped over the railing. He flew out of the bull mound and went straight to the surface of the Dragon King River. When he fell in mid-air, he stepped on the book with the tip of his foot and swept across the sky like an eagle or a falcon. The world Shinran was so close that they could not recognize him. Xianyuan Jingqing floated across the Dragon King River. The first time his foot landed on the shore, it created a big pit. The second step was slightly smaller, and the third step was even smaller. He took 7 consecutive steps, each step stepping on the pit like a blooming lotus. A lotus appeared with each step. After 7 steps, the ground was already covered in dust. Chapter 299. Chapter 3. His Royal Highness's talk about fame and fortune is quite insightful. If a scholar fishes for fame and compliments, it may seem easy, but in fact, it's no different from a merchant. A famous scholar's mysterious talk harms the country. This scholar is not a scholar. Holding the scriptures at home, laughing at the frozen bones outside the door. This kind of reading is indeed not reading. It's just reading the impolite, heartless, and unrighteous heavenly book. Mount Hui Xianyuan Jingqing, on behalf of Zhang Xuanping, who is both a teacher and a friend, pays his respects to His Royal Highness. Xianyuan Jingqing, on behalf of Wang Yangming, a scholar from Xiangfan, pays his respects to the King of Beiliang. Finally, Xianyuan Jingqing pays his respects to the King of Beiliang on behalf of all the poor scholars in the world. Su Fingnian widened his eyes and looked at the scholar in green who was walking towards him. He didn't know that this guy was eavesdropping just now, and he couldn't detect the flow of his qi at all. When they were 30 steps away, the man who called himself Xianyuan Jingqing bowed 3 times in a row. After straightening his back, he stopped moving forward. Murong Wuzhu, who was squatting beside His Royal Highness and picking hawthorns, dropped her hawthorns on the ground when she heard the 2 words, Xianyuan. Murong Tongwang was a little calm, but his knuckles were blue, revealing the panic in his heart. For the siblings, the Xianyuan clansmen on the Bull Mound were not the Jianghu individual immortals who enjoyed the good fortune of the land alone, but the devil who played Jianzhou in the palm of his hand. However, Murong Tongwang still fiercely pulled away his sister who was trying to grab Su Fingnian's sleeve. He almost helped her stand up and walked away. It seemed that he didn't want to be implicated, but Su Fingnian and Murong Tongwang's lips almost curled up at the same time after they separated. Obviously, they had a tacit understanding. Since someone from the Xianyuan family had taken the initiative to attack instead of defending, even knowing Su Fingnian's identity, Su Fingnian didn't dare to slack off in the slightest, even if it was the infamous Xianyuan Jingqing. This person had respectfully bowed 3 times, so there must be something fishy going on. After Su Fingnian stood up, he caught a glimpse of Huang Man, and Qing Niao approaching. They were both in a horn-like position. He smiled and asked, "Mister's 3 bows are enough to shock the heavens and make ghosts weep. I just don't know if Mr. dares to do such a thing on the Bull Mound." Xianyuan Jingqing said calmly, "If you say I don't dare, His Royal Highness doesn't seem to believe it. If I say I don't dare, His Royal Highness will draw his knife on the spot." Su Fengnian stared at the eldest grandson of the Xianyuan family who had become the laughingstock of the Xianyuan family. He didn't want to be deliberately mystified anymore, so he said impatiently, "Say it, why are you looking for me? If it weren't for your friendship with Mr. Sun, why would I talk nonsense with you?" Xianyuan Jingqing went straight to the point and said calmly, "Your Highness, do you know why my daughter, Xianyuan Qingfeng, made things difficult for you in Wuzhou?" Su Fengnian clenched the spring thunder in his left hand. He wanted to kill with one blow with the knife in his left hand. "You didn't go to Mount Hui to look for trouble with the Xianyuan family, but dared to come down the mountain to provoke me. When did the Xianyuan family have a scholar who worried about the country and the people?" Su Fengnian exhaled softly, the qi in his body surging like a river. He smiled and said, "Sir, please speak." Xianyuan Jingqing said calmly, "You look very much like someone. You look like 4 or 5 years old, but your spirit is very similar." Su Fengnian's spring thunder exploded and arrived in front of Xianyuan Jingqing in an instant. It was born out of Spear Fairy Wang Xiu's famous skill, Overlord Armor Removal. The spring thunder struck down, entering Xianyuan Jingqing's neck and coming out from his waist. With one successful strike, it was about to cut him in half. Xianyuan Jingqing frowned. His left foot didn't move, but the tip of his right foot spun, drawing a semicircle on the ground. His left hand held the book behind his back, and his right hand reached out with 2 pale fingers to pinch the spring thunder, following the momentum of Su Fengnian's knife to remove the force. The middle-aged scholar made a sound of surprise and was slightly surprised. The scholar's cuff holding the knife fluttered even though there was no wind. Su Fengnian turned the blade, and Xianyuan Jingqing let go of his hand and stepped back. The tips of his feet crisscrossed, and his figure was indescribably light and graceful. He continued, "And this person is the man that Qingfeng's mother couldn't let go of. If this man didn't die of illness, she definitely wouldn't have married into Mount Hui. Qingfeng's calligraphy and painting were all learned from her mother. There is a portrait that has been hanging for 20 years. When Qingfeng saw you in the lantern market, it was inevitable that she would lose her composure. I hope your Highness will be magnanimous enough to forgive her." Su Fengnian took large strides forward, and the spring thunder pierced straight at the whale. Xianyuan Jingqing held the book in his left hand and struck the spring thunder, swatting it away. Su Fengnian's right hand was about to unsheath the embroidered winter sword when Xianyuan Jingqing, who had endured it time and time again, snorted coldly. His figure suddenly moved forward, and he pressed one hand on Su Fengnian's shoulder. With a gentle push, Su Fengnian was forced to turn his body, but he still took the opportunity to pull out the embroidered winter sword. It was the posture of pulling up a mountain. Xianyuan Jingqing sneered. "You don't know when to stop. How rude and unreasonable His Royal Highness is." Su Fengnian inexplicably sheathed his sword, and the spring thunder and embroidered winter sword returned to their sheaths. "It was because of Huang Man, He smiled and said, "Last time when I went to the tomb outside Zhejiang City, I saw a few wine cups. Were they all yours, sir?" Xianyuan Jingqing nodded dejectedly and asked, "Why did you sheath your sword at the last moment?" Su Fengnian pointed at Huang Man, who was squatting in the distance, and smiled. "My little brother knows if others have any ill intentions." Xianyuan Jingqing said with mixed feelings, "He was born in the Vajra realm." Su Fengnian was puzzled. "Pardon me for asking, but you are obviously a martial arts expert. How did you end up in such a state at Bulgang?" Xianyuan Jingqing calmly revealed the earth-shattering truth. Qingfeng's mother and Xianyuan Great Pan were dual cultivating to take revenge on me. Now this old ancestor wants Qingfeng to enter Bulgang again. Xianyuan Jingqing's voice was steady. He did not deliberately lower his voice to cover his ugliness. Murong Tonghuang and Murong Wuzhu looked at each other. Even the thick-skinned Su Fengnian was stunned. He was shocked beyond words. How could there be such a shameless old man who liked to take advantage of the grass around his nest? That was the daughter-in-law of his eldest grandson. In the end, he did not even let go of his great-granddaughter. He would rather kill the wrong person than let go of the wrong person. Compared to this sensational inside story, trying to kidnap the Murong Shuangbi was not worth mentioning. Xianyuan Jingqing said bitterly, this old ancestor did not indulge in beauty. It was because he wanted to achieve the immortal Zhenren realm that he took an unorthodox path. Su Fengnian scolded, **t. Whether it is the Tao sex bedroom technique or the esoteric sex dual cultivation, Xianyuan Jingqing, are you still a man? Xianyuan Jingqing said indifferently, I have learned all the secret exercises of Mount Hui's Wending Pavilion in 20 years. I have taken a fork in the road with no return. I am not afraid of death. I only ask for the safety of the mother and daughter. Xianyuan Jingqing said slowly. He coughed a few times and covered his mouth. The blood stains were scarlet. It was a ghastly sight. Su Fengnian could not keep up with the thoughts of this sickly scholar. He asked, can you fight with Xianyuan Great Plate to the death? I heard that this old monster's strength is very strong. The Taoist classics in Xianyuan Jingqing's hands were already stained red. He put them behind his back. He smiled at Su Fengnian and said, I can. He wants to achieve immortality. I will let him experience it. However, the immortal Zhenren realm that I have achieved is not really immortality. Therefore, the outcome is 50-50. However, after I die, what will happen to the mother and daughter? I have been thinking about this problem. That is why I have been waiting for His Royal Highness. Today, I came to see Your Highness. Your first blade was excellent. Not to mention that your bladesmanship is accomplished, your blade is even more ruthless. Xianyuan Jingqing sincerely asks for Your Highness' help. In this world, only Your Highness can save the mother and daughter. Su Fengnian was shocked again. Xianyuan Jingqing continued, once Xianyuan Great Plate dies, only my father Xianyuan Guiqi and my younger brother Xianyuan Jingxian will be troublesome in Mount Hui. If these two die, as long as Your Highness can protect Qingfeng's life, you can use her as a puppet to control the bull gang. Su Fengnian asked, is this a trap set by the Xianyuan family? Xianyuan Jingqing shook his head and said, no. Su Fengnian was helpless. He shook his head and said, if it is as you said, it is not difficult for me to do it. However, you must help to get rid of either Xianyuan Guiqi or Xianyuan Jingxian. Otherwise, it will be too difficult for a helpless Xianyuan Qingfeng to swallow an elephant. Xianyuan Jingqing said without hesitation, all right. I will go up the mountain and kill Xianyuan Jingxian first. Su Fengnian was speechless. Was this man completely crazy? Xianyuan Jingqing looked at the navy blue bull gang and murmured, I am here. This mountain man went up the mountain to kill people. Chapter 300. This bull hill that confronted the mansion of Taoist master was really a mixed group of good and bad people. Enjoying the good fortune of the land alone. Su Fengnian sat back on the hillside and wrote a few names on the ground with the spring thunder. He asked Murong Tonghuang, how much do you think Xianyuan Jingqing's words can be trusted? Murong Tonghuang sneered, even if Xianyuan Jingqing really endured the humiliation for 20 years, it's hard to guarantee that this lunatic won't attack His Highness. Killing Xianyuan Dandan and Xianyuan Jingxian, this person will definitely die. But Xianyuan, the Grand Master of Swordsmanship, has been guarding Mount Hui for hundreds of years. How can His Highness's 100 cavalrymen easily suppress him? It's better to let two tigers fight than to lure the tiger away. I don't believe that Xianyuan Jingqing, as the legitimate son of Xianyuan sect, didn't have a few unknown schemes in the past 20 years. Once His Highness dies in the Bull Hill, Beiliang will only vent his anger on Mount Hui. The mother and daughter took advantage of the chaos to enter Jianghu. They are really free birds flying in the sky. If Xianyuan Jingqing is really sincere, kowtowing to His Highness 3 times and exposing his own scandal is nothing. Su Fengnian nodded, it's probably true that Xianyuan Jingqing wants to turn against his family. Su Fingnian sighed, 20 years to achieve immortality through unorthodox methods and overturn hundreds of years of foundation with his own strength. Why does it sound so chilling? Murong Tong Wang had a pair of silkworm eyebrows, but he usually looked more charming than heroic. At this time, he raised his eyebrows and smiled even more gloatingly. The Xianyuan family should have fallen apart and died long ago. Su Fingnian took the hawthorn from Huang Man and sat cross-legged. He put the hawthorn in his robe and threw one into his mouth. He waved to Murong Tong Huang and said, "Don't be in a hurry to say angry words." The onlooker sees the situation clearly. You're half an outsider. We're not in a hurry to go up the mountain. You can talk about it casually and see if you can find some clues. No matter how inexplicable it is, in the end, there are only two paths, go up the mountain or not. Murong Tong Wang nodded and said, "Going up the mountain, Your Highness has to take a lot of risks. I'm afraid this is also the original intention of Xianyuan Jingqing to endure until now. He may not be willing to fall out with his family until he has a chance to rely on a strong external force. Otherwise, with Mount Hui's family background, only a land immortal like Qi Xuanjin can come and go like walking on flat ground. Xianyuan Jingqing is obviously not so strong. When the snipe and the clam fight, the mother and daughter will reap the benefits. In fact, it's better if Your Highness doesn't go up the mountain. Or rather, you can go up the mountain slowly and let Xianyuan Jingqing fight with all his strength. I believe that by that time, Hui Mountain's vitality will be greatly damaged. However, if you want to fish in troubled waters at this time, it's far better to take the risk and go up the mountain to hold the line for Xianyuan Jingqing." Su Fingnian always couldn't finish the hawthorn because he almost finished one. Huang Man had already carefully wiped a handful with his sleeve. Su Fingnian wiped the carelessly written words on the ground with spring lightning and threw some hawthorns to the siblings. He said with a smile, "Go up the mountain, we have to go up the mountain early." Murong Tong Wang frowned and said, "Why?" Su Fingnian stood up and looked at Bull Gang and said softly, "To watch a fight." Murong Tong Wang asked carefully and tentatively, "Your Highness is addicted to martial arts?" Su Fingnian said self-mockingly, "I'm just greedy for life and afraid of death." Of course, there are also the thoughts of chivalrous heroes who want to save beauty since childhood. Murong Tong Wang turned his head and couldn't help laughing. The word chivalrous heroes could be said by anyone, but it was said by the eldest son of Ren Tu, who made the whole Jianghu tremble under the sound of horse hooves. It was ridiculous. Su Fingnian said with a smile, "Laugh if you want." Although Murong Tong Wang had let down some of his guard, he didn't have the guts to be presumptuous in front of His Royal Highness. Of course, he didn't dare to make fun of him. Su Fingnian patted Huang Man's head and said, "Let's go to Mount Hui. Tear apart whoever blocks the way." Huang Man's originally turbid eyes instantly blossomed with light. Su Fingnian turned to Blue Bird and said, "Go to Xiaoyao Temple and tell the old god of swords and the Phoenix Battalion. You'd better bring the instant spear. We'll meet at Qinglong Creek. This time, we'll play big. By the way, I'll remind the old celestial master Zhao Shituan that Mount Longhu better not get involved. You can explain to the old celestial master that Xianyuan Jingqing invited us to go up the mountain. Let him know that this is a family matter of Mount Hui and not me trying to make trouble for the Xianyuan family." Blue Bird held the bamboo basket and nodded, "Got it." On top of the mud wall of Xiaoyao Temple, old Taoist Zhao stretched his neck and looked at the middle-aged Confucian scholar who was walking on the river. Li Chungang sneered, "This old man really doesn't understand the ways of the world." Back then, heavenly phenomenon aside, a finger Xian realm cultivator could rank among the top 10 in the world. Now, finger Xian realm cultivators are as worthless as roadside cabbages. Are they embarrassed to greet people if they're not in the Vajra realm? Zhao Shituan, who had just touched the threshold of the finger Xian realm, blushed and said, "Old brotherly, you must be joking. These 30 years in the Jianghu are indeed different from the previous 30 years. There are many geniuses and freaks, but there aren't as many Vajras as dogs. His Royal Highness going out to travel is naturally different from ordinary people roaming the Jianghu. If Su Fingnian wasn't the son of the king of Beiliang and his Royal Highness could be hereditary, how could he have met Wu Luding who blocked the river? How could he have met the 11th Wang Mingyin? Even more so, he wouldn't have been humiliated by Xianyuan Jingqing who had just arrived at Mount Longhu. It's not that the Jianghu is changing too quickly, but that old brotherly is following this brat who's too eye-catching. How could a Jianghu person without any ability dare to humiliate himself in front of the heir of Beiliang? Let's not talk about old brotherly, these 100 elite Phoenix battalion are enough to make a big pot of water. Small fishes and shrimps would have been slapped to death long ago. Li Chungang snorted and said, "What's up with this Xianyuan Jingqing who floated down the bull mound? What's up with your so-called immortal Zhenren realm?" The old celestial master stroked his beard and squinted his eyes. This young man has a tough life. He's very talented, but as the eldest grandson of the Xianyuan family, he chose not to walk the path of martial arts. When he went down the mountain to take the imperial examinations, he fell in love with a Jianghu woman who didn't know how to repay kindness. That woman didn't come from a good background, but she was stubborn. She probably didn't want to be brought up to Mount Wishan. Xianyuan Pan saw the opportunity and used both the carrot and the stick to dual cultivation. As for whether Xianyuan Pan had the intention to force his grandson to practice martial arts, only God knows. In the past 20 to 30 years, Xianyuan Pan had devoted himself to cultivating the joyful Zen and the art of sex. He had no taboos at all. A few yellow crowns from Mount Longhu had been killed by him. However, those Taoist nuns were also strange. After the incident, they did not say a word. Instead, they took the initiative to be cauldrons at Yunyi side. Xianyuan Pan's ability to control people was impressive. This old bastard was already popular with women when he was young. I heard that in the past 2 years, he took a fancy to Xianyuan Jingqing's daughter, Xianyuan Qingfeng. I guess this time he finally crossed Xianyuan Jingqing's bottom line and no longer swallowed it. However, I'm not sure how Xianyuan Jingqing became an immortal Zhenren. I only know that this kid has been borrowing books from the Celestial Master residence for the past 20 years. He's always been on good terms with my arrogant nephew, Zhao Danping. How strange, I'll have to ask Zhao Danping later. The old god of swords sneered, looking at his ocean of qi. It's the reverse path of seeking death. It's not worth mentioning. The old celestial master said regretfully, if this kid wasn't so eager for success, the land of bliss on the stone tablet would be worthy of its name. The old god of swords spat and said, if he didn't seek death and used his life to exchange for the realm, would he just watch his daughter enter the mouth of that old bastard Xianyuan Pan? Zhao Shituan put his hands in his sleeves and sighed continuously. He frowned and said, brotherly, do you think His Royal Highness will take over this hot potato? Li Chungang said without hesitation, nonsense, it's at least a battle of Xian finger against Xian finger. It might even be the peak battle of celestial phenomenon. Would that kid not go? Zhao Shituan still sighed and said, if that's the case, Jiangdong Xianyuan will really be unable to recover for at least 30 years. Li Chungang sneered and said, Xianyuan and Sword Pool are already a few levels lower than the Wu family's sword tomb. Back then, the Wu family's sword master came out and defeated 10,000 riders with 9 swords. That's true glory. Xianyuan and Sword Pool are nothing. Can they stand shoulder to shoulder with the Wu family sword tomb? It's all the flattery of those bastards in the Jianghu. Seeing Bluebird carrying a bamboo basket of hawthorns towards Xiaoyao Temple, the old god of swords asked, are you going to Mount Wishan later? The old celestial master laughed bitterly and said, I'm not feeling well. Li Chungang floated down the wall and said disdainfully, old woman, you still have such matters. Zhao Shituan stared but didn't dare to refute. Li Chungang added insult to injury and said, aren't you afraid that your disciple will be at a disadvantage? The old celestial master suddenly became spirited and said happily, "My disciple won't be at a disadvantage. It's not that I'm boasting, but the number of people who can hurt Huang Manor can be counted on one hand. But if you want to kill my disciple, there might be one or two in Mount Longhu, but there aren't any in Mount Huishan. Next should be a small climax." Chapter 301. The buildings on the Bull Mound were very particular, with a strict hierarchy and complicated rules. For example, the rear courtyard where the eldest branch lived was small, but it had everything. There was also a banquet hall, vermilion lacquer, carved red sandalwood, and flying beasts. A large plaque hung on the wall with the words, "Heavenly Eternal Winter." There was a courtyard in front and a garden in the back. The east and west wings had a building above them, and there was a large glazed vat half the height of a person in the courtyard. It could hold several thousand caddies of water, and there were 8 or 9 lotus flowers planted there. They were slender and elegant, their roots visible, and a dozen or so fat red carps leisurely swam inside. It was early autumn, and yellow leaves covered the bluestone tiles under the eaves between the red walls and green tiles. No one cleaned the place, so it was cold and cheerless. A woman in a gorgeous palace dress stood in front of the glazed fish vat, holding a small porcelain bowl. She tossed bait into the vat, attracting red carps to swim happily. Her posture was graceful, and her expression was languid. A tall and sturdy man in gorgeous clothes walked straight into the courtyard. A maidservant beside the woman hurriedly lowered her head, not daring to look at him. The middle-aged man's hands were on the edge of his onyx belt, and he habitually gave off an arrogant feeling. Even though he should be calling the woman sister-in-law in this courtyard, he still refused to restrain his arrogance. He raised a hand and waved, driving away the maidservant who was staring at her feet. It was unknown how this submissive maidservant saw the man waving his hand, but she ran toward the door as if she had been pardoned. When she passed by the man, she was fiercely slapped on the buttocks, causing her to pale in fright. The woman with a cold expression was indifferent to this and continued to feed the carps. The middle-aged man walked in front of the glazed vat and extended 2 fingers to stroke the smooth walls of the vat. He smiled and said, "Sister-in-law, we're a single man and woman, aren't we doing anything?" The woman stared at the carefree red carps and coldly said, "Xianyuan Jingxian, aren't you afraid that if you swallow my dumplings, you'll burn your tongue along with your heart, liver, spleen, and kidneys?" The man who was called by his name by the woman said indifferently, "Sister-in-law lives in seclusion, so of course you don't know." After the ancestor came out of seclusion this time, he intends to entrust the position of the family head to me. It's no wonder that sister-in-law doesn't know about this. Sister-in-law and the ancestor haven't dual cultivated for some time, right? The man placed his palm on the colored glass fish tank and abruptly exerted his strength. More than a dozen carps and lotus roots were pulled to the side of the tank and stuck to it, unable to move. He bent down to look at the carps that were struggling on their deathbed and smiled. Xianyuan Jingxian has been drooling over sister-in-law for a long time. This is something that everyone in Mount Hui knows. Once I officially take over this large bull's nest, how could the old ancestor care about an old and worn-out cauldron? That bookworm big brother of mine worships you like a fairy, thinking that you're above the common populace, but he clearly doesn't understand a woman's thoughts at all. He's wasted all those sage books he's read. A woman in her 30s is like a wolf and in her 40s is like a tiger. Once she's tasted the sweet rain after a long drought, how could she endure loneliness? Isn't that right, sister-in-law? The woman was humiliated in such a way, but she remained unmoved. She only looked at the carps that were almost suffocating to death and indifferently mocked, "Xianyuan Jingxian, what are you so impatient for? It won't be too late to vent your frustrations when you become the head of the Xianyuan family." That's right, do you remember when you went to southern border 6 years ago? Sister-in-law just happened to see that loyal and unswerving wife of yours on the large bull's bed, but she was extremely seductive. When she first came to Mount Hui, she called me a depraved slut every day. Haven't you wondered why she shut up these past few years? I might as well make it clear to you, it was sister-in-law who pitied her for being lonely, so rather than wasting energy scolding others, she might as well save her energy to serve others in bed. Sister-in-law was so merciful that she earnestly asked old ancestor to shower her with rain and dew. Xianyuan Jingshuan's expression darkened and he paused for a moment. His palm left the wall of the glazed fish tank and the lotus flowers all snapped. Blood seeped out from the scales of the dozen or so carps, and their corpses floated to the surface. Xianyuan Jingxian said the word good 3 times in a row, then grinned maliciously. Xianyuan Jingqing, this big brother, can't do anything even after being beaten 3 times with a stick. I didn't expect sister-in-law to be so scheming, knowing how to use small tricks to retaliate. This is for the best. Today, I'll carry sister-in-law back. I want to see if there's anyone in the eldest branch who can be as unyielding as sister-in-law. Or perhaps Xianyuan Jingqing will simply wantonly have fun with sister-in-law here. I heard that sister-in-law fell ill from longing for a portrait, so I don't mind hanging that portrait at the head of your bed to liven things up. Sister-in-law, what do you think? Isn't Jingxian much more amorous than Big Brother? The woman calmly gazed at the blood-soaked fish tank and smiled. Compared to Xianyuan Jingqing, you think too highly of him. Xianyuan Jingxian asked, Sister-in-law, when you're in bed later, you'll have to use all your skills. A woman's 18 types of martial arts. Xianyuan Jingxian, you're worse than an animal. An angry roar came from the door. When Xianyuan Jingxian heard the familiar voice, he couldn't be bothered to turn around. He laughed indulgently and said, Qing Feng, I heard that the bastard surnamed Yuan you thought so highly of is already half dead, so your mother's fate today will be your fate in a few years. Uncle has the patience to wait for that day. Uncle might even wonder if Qing Feng already has a young daughter by the time he reaches 60 years of age. In the past, I didn't understand the meaning of the words enjoying the blessings of the land alone on the stone tablet, but now I understand that this kind of blessings is truly something that only immortals can enjoy. Xianyuan Qing Feng stood at the door, his fingernails digging into his palms. When she saw her daughter, a trace of panic finally flashed through the woman's eyes. She coldly said, Qing Feng, leave this place. Xianyuan Jingxian clicked his tongue and laughed. What a touching mother-daughter relationship. Chapter 302. A series of untimely coughs could be heard. Xianyuan Jingxian was stunned and slowly turned around. When he saw a figure appear in the doorway, he was subconsciously startled, but he was immediately amused by his own panic. He stood next to the large glazed vat and unbridled guffawed. The reason why he was surprised was because Xianyuan Jingxian knew that anyone could set foot in this large sex inner court except for the man at the doorway. And that man just so happened to be the husband of the woman behind Xianyuan Jingxian. How absurd was this? Back then, his wife in her prime would rather dual cultivate with the old ancestor, causing the eldest son of the first wife to become a laughingstock. She would rather stare blankly at a yellowed portrait for 20 years than look directly at her husband. No one would believe it even if he told them. Xianyuan Jingxian, who was on the verge of tears from laughing, wiped the corners of his eyes with a sinister expression. He remembered the warm scene of the 3 brothers standing on the Aspiration Cauldron Pavilion's river-gazing platform when they were children, standing on their tiptoes and leaning against the railing. He clearly remembered that his eldest brother said that he wanted to be a civil official whose name would go down in history, his second brother said that he wanted to revive the family's prestige and surpass the Wu family's sword tomb, and Xianyuan Jingxian declared that he wanted to be a martial artist like Wang Xinji who could smash the enlightened masters of Longhu into meat patties with a single punch. The 3 brothers were still as close as brothers at that time, but after they grew up, the 3 of them had completely different futures. Second brother Xianyuan Jingyi had the demeanor of a great general and was clever in all aspects, absorbing many forces in Jianghu that could not be underestimated. Xianyuan Jingxian himself had made great strides on the martial path and was now on the verge of stepping into the Grandmaster realm. His future achievements would only be greater than his father's. But as for his eldest brother, despite the great expectations and resources the old ancestor had bestowed upon him, he was still a useless piece of trash who could only be submissive when speaking to others and would only retreat when arguing with others. In the Xianyuan family, where martial arts were highly valued, how could a martial arts fanatic like Xianyuan Jingxian respect an older brother who had never touched a sword or a staff and only knew how to hold a few books? After coughing, the middle-aged scholar still did not enter the courtyard. He covered his mouth and said vaguely, "Jingxian, you should have waited a little longer. Unfortunately, you've never had much patience since you were young. This is not good." Xianyuan Jingxian seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world. He had just stopped laughing when he couldn't help but laugh again. He placed his hands on his agate belt and looked straight at his sickly older brother, Xianyuan Jingqing. "Eldest brother, what do you think I should have waited? Should I have waited for you to become the head of the family with your righteousness and morals? Should I have waited for my niece to become a pitiful cauldron furnace, or should I have waited for my fathers to run out again?" Jingshuan's SS father, Jingshuan's father, but eldest, SSS, use, my eldest, even my s. Is, tus. Xianyuan Jingqing loosened his grip and nodded, "Go on." Xianyuan Jingxian chuckled. "I've endured it for many years and I really don't want to endure it any longer, s. 2. Xianyuan Qingfeng's expression changed drastically. The pale-faced scholar slowly said, "But you know that this kind of excessive enthusiasm is like a tree without roots. It has no long-term benefits to the martial path." Xianyuan Jingxian rubbed his stomach and sneered. "You sure are sincere when you say these words. It enlightens me. My stomach hurts from laughing." Xianyuan Jingqing turned to look in the direction of Bull Landing and murmured, "Mount Hui will only be cleaner when it snows heavily in winter. Our family is really too dirty." Xianyuan Qingfeng extended his hand and motioned for his mother to leave the courtyard and stay away from his uncle who had reached the finger-profound realm. But the woman did not move. She would never approach that man of her own accord. The middle-aged scholar stared deeply at her and smiled faintly. There was an indescribable sense of open-mindedness and relief. He, who had never set foot in this courtyard, actually walked over the threshold for the first time. She and Xianyuan Qingfeng were both dazed. Xianyuan Jingxian still had a disapproving and arrogant expression. He sneered, "Big brother, what? Are you going to beat me with a book?" Xianyuan Jingqing shook his head. "Mount Hui cannot be built without destruction. Xianyuan Great Pan has already led Mount Hui down a fork in the road. Today, I will turn it back on the right path. In terms of martial talent, you and Xianyuan Jingqing cannot compare to me. You are the finger-profound realm, so I will kill you with the finger-profound realm." The middle-aged scholar spoke unhurriedly. The sleeves of his wide green robe fluttered elegantly. The mother and daughter only saw this man who had stood aloof from worldly affairs his entire life walk straight toward Xianyuan Jingxian. He seemed to be walking slowly, but he arrived in front of Xianyuan Jingxian in the blink of an eye. Xianyuan Jingxian, who was clearly already at the finger-profound realm, widened his eyes. The middle-aged scholar grabbed him by the neck with one hand and continued walking. They passed through the large glazed vat and arrived at the rear courtyard. The scholar stopped and threw Xianyuan Jingxian into the room. His body exploded in midair. The middle-aged scholar, who was bleeding slightly from his 7 orifices, turned around. He seemed to want to reach out and touch his wife, but in the end, he did not have the courage. When he passed by his daughter at the entrance of the courtyard, he said softly, "Qingfeng, from now on, you will take care of your mother." The woman suddenly shouted, "Xianyuan Jingqing, where are you going?" The middle-aged scholar continued walking and smiled warmly. "To Bull's Descent Snow Field. After sweeping this house clean, you will be truly free. The saint said that if you do not sweep a house, how can you sweep the world?" Unfortunately, Xianyuan Jingqing can only reach this step in this lifetime. Xianyuan Jingxing does not regret marrying you back then. Chapter 303. Dead. Inside the room, Xianyuan Jingxian couldn't be any more dead. Even the legendary Earth Immortals wouldn't be able to survive if their sea of qi exploded and all their meridians exploded. Outside the room, the woman stared blankly at the shattered glass vat. More than a dozen red carps were hidden among the green leaves of the lotus flowers. Just now, the two of them had passed through the vat in an instant, causing thousands of pounds of water to pour out and wet her embroidered silk shoes. What a cool autumn day. The autumn wind and autumn chill spread from the soles of her feet to her entire body. Xianyuan Qingfeng leaned weakly against the door. Even though she had always been praised by her elders for being able to remain calm during major events, she had lost the ability to think. Her mind was blank. No matter how immoral her uncle, Xianyuan Jingxian, was, after all, a genuine top-notch martial artist. He had cultivated a Vajra physique for several decades by following the prescribed order. In Mount Hui, he was publicly recognized as second only to the great ancestor and Xianyuan Guiqi, who possessed immortal qi. He had even claimed to have entered the mysterious Finger Xian realm. So what if he had just entered the Finger Xian realm and his foundation was still unstable? Only after reaching the Finger Xian realm could one truly become a towering tree that stood tall in the martial arts world. Taoist enlightened masters had hopes of ascending, living Buddhas of Buddhism could become Sariras, and unaffiliated martial artists outside of the three religions were even more ferocious and domineering. How did he die in the blink of an eye? Xianyuan Qingfeng was limited by her mediocre talent and constitution, so she wasn't suitable for martial arts. However, she had read many secret manuals since she was a child and was used to seeing experts fight. She especially had a photographic memory, so her eyes were very sharp. She could see that after Xianyuan Jingxian lost focus for a moment, he actually wanted to kill his opponent very quickly. However, his opponent didn't give him the chance at all. There was probably no way to die in peace more than this. As a Finger Xian expert, he was casually walked up to him and killed in a single move. In that instant, Xianyuan Qingfeng saw through some secrets. Xianyuan Jingxuan's body was like that of a Buddhist heavenly king's Vajra. Although he was still 2 levels away from the celestial phenomenon realm, where both the inside and outside of his body were in harmony with the world, at the very least, his body had already formed a majestic image of its own. The reason why it was shattered with a single strike seemed to be because after being grabbed by the neck, Xianyuan Jingxian had used a tyrannical and vicious method to guide the flow of qi. It was like the tortoise and serpent of the northern black tortoise entangling with each other, which ultimately caused his meridians to explode inch by inch. Xianyuan Qingfeng wanted to say something, but hesitated. His lips trembled as he realized that he didn't know what to say. When she saw that her mother was about to turn around and enter the house, she finally gathered her courage and asked, "Mother, are we really not going to Bull's Descent Snowfield?" The woman turned her head and asked, "Are we going to see how Xianyuan Jingxing seeks death?" Xianyuan Qingfeng muttered to himself, since father was able to kill Xianyuan Jingxian, it's not impossible for him to. She stepped over the threshold and didn't even look at the badly mutilated corpse. She smiled and said, "So what? If Xianyuan Jingxing is not the Xianyuan Jingxing that we mother and son know, I will regret it so much that my intestines turn green, and I will cry like a weeping beauty to beg him to change his mind. Afterwards, we will treat each other with respect and grow old together at Mount Hui." Tears streamed down Xianyuan Qingfeng's face. "Mother, you really don't feel the slightest bit of heartache?" She smiled and said, I have long since forgotten the feeling of heartache. If you want to go, then go to Snowfield. Mother wants to be alone for a while." An old mama who had watched Xianyuan Qingfeng grow up hurriedly rushed over and respectfully reported, "Madam, miss, for some reason, Lord has gone to Snowfield alone." At the foot of the mountain, someone claimed that Lord had invited him to Bull's Descent Snowfield as a guest. It seems to be that domineering heir of Bailiang. He has already begun to climb the mountain and will soon arrive at East Sect. Those who blocked the way at the estate were all torn apart by an unremarkable youth. His methods were extremely swift and fierce. Rumor has it that the divine swordsman Li Chungang who humiliated our Xianyuan family in the past was also among them. Second Master has already brought people to stop them. After climbing the Bull's Descent snowfield, there was a jade passageway paved with 300 steps, and a memorial arch built across the road. This was Mount Hui's Xianyuan sect's East Sect. The words, "Reach the Peak of Perfection," were written on the plaque, and the words, "Martial Dao Contract Kunlun," were written on it. Their neighbor, Mount Longhu, also had a similar structure. All civil and military officials had to dismount from their horses in front of the tablet to demonstrate the reverence of the ancestral court of Taoism. When it came to Mount Hui, it was a reminder to all the Jianghu people who came to visit to voluntarily remove their swords and sabers. It wasn't that there weren't arrogant and boorish martial artists who didn't want to follow the rules, but those who succeeded like Li Chungang could be counted on one's fingers. The vast majority of them were thrown off the Bull's Descent snowfield. The sallow and emaciated Su Longxiang was in a killing frenzy. He was simply invincible. Chapter 304. One must know that Mount Hui was said to be home to nearly 1,000 martial arts elites. The Xianyuan family dominated the southeast and could be divided into several types of people. The first type was the direct descendants of the family who were born with the surname Xianyuan. This branch was led by the third branch of the Mount Hui family. Under the head of the family, Xianyuan Guiqi, there were Xianyuan Jingxian and Xianyuan Jingxian supporting the family. Together, they formed the most luxuriant martial arts tree in the southeast of the dynasty. These people had the innate advantage of being close to the family. Based on their bloodline and talent in martial arts, they could go to the Wending Pavilion to obtain secret manuals. Then there were the lackeys that Xianyuan had raised with both secret manuals and a lot of money. There were two kinds of lackeys. Those who were of noble status were guests and enjoyed good treatment in Mount Huishan. Those who came from humble backgrounds and were not strong enough had to work hard for the Xianyuan family with their tails between their legs in order to earn a living. If Yuan Tingshan did not have a relationship with Xianyuan Qingfeng, he would belong to this camp and had to rely on his own ability to get what he wanted. Then there were the private forces that Xianyuan had carefully cultivated. There were two main forces. One was made up of 200 cavalrymen and 50 heavy cavalrymen who had spent a lot of money. The other was made up of 150 light cavalrymen who were relatively cheaper. The other group was made up of loyal men of sacrifice. Their identities were complicated. Some of them were warriors or rangers who had fled to Hui Mountain to seek refuge. Most of them were assassins who had been slowly cultivated by Xianyuan as pawns since they were young. Very few of them could live to 30 years of age, which showed how active the Xianyuan family was in the southeast Jianghu. His Royal Highness and Huang Manor stood together under the Yi Gate. Beside them stood the old man with the sheepskin fur coat. Blue Bird held the instant spear. Behind them were the halberd Ningame and 100 white horses. Near the two gates were a crowd of people. Sabers, spears, staffs, and all kinds of weapons were present. Xianyuan Jingxian stood on the steps with a gloomy expression. Close to 100 archers with outstanding arm strength held the geographical advantage, ready to shoot. More than 30 guests had turned out in full force. They were all experts who had been famous in the Jianghu for a long time. Su Fingnian clicked his tongue and sighed. What a turbulent Jianghu! Dark clouds had already gathered overhead, and there was actually a sign of heavy rain. A few decades later, Old Man Li, who was now one-armed and without a sword, dozed off while standing. He did not say a word. Su Fingnian turned his head and asked, "How far is it from here to the thieves' lair?" The elderly god of swords opened his eyes slightly and said lazily, "It's not too far." Outside of Bull Landing, there was a large piece of flat land, which was the snow plateau. If I'm not mistaken, Xianyuan Jingxing will have a fight with Xianyuan Pan there. It is indeed a good place for people to die. Su Fengnian felt a headache coming on. There are so many first and second-rate experts and a few hundred men of sacrifice. How are we going to get past them? Li Chungang grumpily said, this old man can easily pass through by himself. As for you, if you want to fight force with force, then you'll have to wait to die here. Do you think that the foundation of a large clan that has been established for hundreds of years is just for show? Su Fengnian whispered, to catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. The elderly god of swords thought for a while and said, you mean to take down Xianyuan Jingqing? Su Fengnian smiled and nodded, eager to give it a try. The elderly god of swords rubbed his chin and narrowed his eyes. If this old man were to personally take action, it would be simple. However, without this old man's effort, you'll just sit back and watch the show. Kid, let Huang Man yell first to show your strength and tear a few people apart before talking about anything else. Then, let this girl beside you, who can play anything but the instant spear, hold the fort. When this old man will take action, it will depend on his mood. Don't worry, I won't make you wait too long. This old man was also very curious about how high Xianyuan Jingqing could reach if he did not hesitate to exchange his life for his realm. It was not too rare for heavenly phenomenon experts to fight each other, but it would be interesting if both of them were trapped in a situation where they would fight to the death. If half a land immortal accidentally popped out, it would be a feast for the eyes. Kid, you don't have any other abilities, but you're just a so-so at stealing from others. Looking at Huang Man, taking large strides forward, the elderly god of swords said with slight sadness, this old man's painstaking efforts back then have been wasted. Xianyuan Jingqing finally appeared after much difficulty, yet he still rebelled. This big tree has been hollowed out in the hands of Xianyuan Jingqing. In the end, it is still going to fall. Great Snow Plateau. The middle-aged scholar walked slowly against the wind. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, making him stand out from the crowd. After enduring silently for 20 years, he finally revealed his loftiness at this moment. Along the way, he kept coughing and blood seeped out. No one could see through him. Xianyuan Jingqing thought of many things, good and bad, honor and disgrace, ups and downs. Xianyuan Jingqing stopped and looked at the tall figure at the end of the great snow plateau. He muttered, I've finally reached here. That figure was abnormally tall and sturdy. This was an old man with a technique to retain his youthful appearance. The old man who had a head full of white hair 20 years ago actually had black hair at his temples. He stood at the entrance of Bull Descendant's mansion without a smile. One man guarding the pass with a majestic aura. This old ancestor, the only one on Mount Hui who had the qualifications to say that he enjoyed the land's blessings alone, had a sharp gaze and a loud voice. Jingqing, have you ever read To Resonate with Heaven and Earth? His deep voice surged in the great snow plateau. There was a string of wind chimes hanging under the eaves of Bull Descendant's house. Because of the strong wind at the peak of the mountain, they jingled all year round. At this moment, it was silent. Like a person who was about to die with his neck strangled. Xianyuan Jingqing said calmly, whether it is a celestial phenomenon or not, we'll know after we try. The old man who had been in charge of the Xianyuan family for 60 years was able to return to his original state after nearly 20 years. He laughed heartily and said, I'd like to see if this unfilial descendant of yours can endure 100 moves. Xianyuan Jingqing, who no longer needed to painstakingly suppress his realm, raised his hand. He stepped out with his right foot and bent his left foot slightly. He stretched out one hand and pulled back the other. It was too wonderful for words. In an instant, the dark clouds in the sky spun like a tornado and suddenly descended. Xianyuan Jingqing said softly, I shake Kunlun. Chapter 305. If Xianyuan Jingxian was said to be an unsheathed sword, then Xianyuan Jingqing was a blunt saber. Although it was not as sharp, it was more useful to the clan. Xianyuan Jingxuan's temperament was not suited to dealing with people. That eldest grandson of his, who was always elusive, only knew how to study, so many heavy responsibilities naturally fell on Xianyuan Jingjing's shoulders. He welcomed guests from all over the world and was adept at nurturing soldiers. The second branch's position had risen over the years, becoming more and more stable. Out of 10 guest officials, Xianyuan Jingxian was in charge of 200 cavalry. When the heroes of the nearby provinces mentioned him, they would all raise their thumbs and praise him for being a timely rain from Jiangdong. There was once a beautiful servant who made fun of a lame martial artist who came up the mountain out of admiration. The latter descended the mountain in shame and indignation. When Xianyuan Jingxian heard this, he immediately cut off the head of his favorite servant and carried it down the mountain to beg for forgiveness. At that time, this martial artist was just a nobody in Jianghu, but now he was a guest official of Mount Hui. The generation with the surname Jing was divided into 3 branches, and the distribution of resources was always going to be uneven, so there was no such thing as keeping pace. The eldest grandson, Xianyuan Jingqing, was already recognized as a withered tree with sparse branches and leaves, without any shade to speak of. Xianyuan Jingxian was too domineering, even daring to say that he would eat dumplings and eat sisters-in-law. Coupled with his self-confidence in his grandmaster realm, it was hard to avoid suspicion that he was 1,000 miles away from others. Did Xianyuan Jingjing have any thoughts of moving into Yunyu town in the future? Now that he was riding a tiger, it was hard to get off. He himself did not want to, but with everyone propping him up on the bonfire, it seemed that he had no choice but to fight for it. In the family, there were only free and unfettered dogs, but no free and unfettered people. His eldest brother, Xianyuan Jingqing, had already given him the desolate fate of not fighting for it. Xianyuan Jingshuan's appearance was dignified, and when he was young, he was known as an elegant young master of Jiangdong. However, his temperament was honest, and his sharpness was restrained, so it was very easy for people to feel close to him. At this moment, Xianyuan Jingxian had a headache as he faced off against those uninvited Beiliang barbarians, but he wasn't afraid. He had more than 100 archers by his side, and their arm strength was undoubtedly much better than that of ordinary soldiers. A volley of arrows rained down like water. What's more, the guests of Mount Huishan had heard that it was Rin Tu's son who had ascended the mountain. They were united against a common enemy. Even those from third brother's side had rushed over after hearing the news. In Xianyuan Jingzong's opinion, if the other side did not have the support of the old divine swordsman Li Chungang, it would be like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. Li Chungang was single-handedly wielding a spear and riding a horse. No matter how old he was, how could the 30 guests not be able to surround him? However, there were many things in this world that could not be explained by ordinary reasoning. In a chess game that he was certain to win, Xianyuan Jingxian did not dare to be too presumptuous. If he really got carried away and accidentally slaughtered that Beiliang heir, what good would that do for Mount Hui? Xianyuan Jingxian gazed at His Royal Highness under the Yi sect. There was a great disparity in numbers between the two sides. Since victory was already in his grasp, he only needed to control the strength of his blows. Xianyuan Jingshuan's thoughts drifted. He was confident that his martial arts talent was not inferior to his younger brothers, but these past few years, his father, Xianyuan Jingxian, had devoted most of his time to the sword. Most of the year, he was either in seclusion or exploring secluded places in search of otherworldly experts to sharpen his swordsmanship. Xianyuan Jingxian poured his heart and soul into managing an aristocratic family, so it was inevitable that his martial arts cultivation would be delayed. In his youth, his eldest brother, Xianyuan Jingxian, had not touched martial arts other than a few techniques to strengthen his body. Xianyuan Jingxian and Xianyuan Jingxian were equally matched when it came to martial arts. After reaching the age of 30, Xianyuan Jingxian had even surpassed him. After reaching the no-doubt state, he had to worry about the trivial matters of the family, and it was only then that his third brother, Xianyuan Jingxian, gradually began to leave. How could Xianyuan Jingxian not hate his eldest brother? If it wasn't for the fact that Xianyuan Jingxing was unwilling to learn martial arts and take up the heavy responsibility. Thinking of this, Xianyuan Jingxing couldn't help but laugh at himself in his heart. 10 years ago, he was still secretly grateful to Big Brother Ling for not fighting for power. It was only later that he realized that the glamorous position that seemed to be in his hands was neither enticing nor reliable. The guests on the bull mound were divided into 3 distinct groups. Those who had clearly joined Xianyuan Jingxing and Xianyuan Jingshuan's camps were split into 2 groups. The rest were still undecided. The situation of who the next family head would fall into was still unclear. This group of Jianghu bigwigs clearly decided that they wouldn't act unless they saw a rabbit. Birds of a feather flocked together. The guests of Mount Hui besides Xianyuan Jingxing all had relatively gentle personalities. They all had good reputations in Jianghu. They belonged to the type of heroes who eliminated evil and eliminated evil. Each of them was awe-inspiring righteous. When they saw His Royal Highness and his group walking up the mountain, they all showed expressions of righteous indignation. On the other hand, Xianyuan Jingshuan's group was the complete opposite. Most of them were fugitives who had fled into the mountains in search of protection, and they were all infamous for their ferocity. Among them, there were a few bandits who were among the best in the southeastern region of the dynasty, and there was also a notorious flower picker. The last group was both good and evil. They didn't adhere to morals. They were called the martial loose men by the orthodox people in the imperial court who had a good impression of Jianghu. These people usually didn't do great evil. When they felt like it, they would do some good deeds. Over time, they had accumulated some reputation. At this time, the 2 guests' gazes met and then immediately looked away, as if they were disgusted. Xianyuan Jingxian inwardly smiled. This was the result of his deliberate management. The number of guests in Mount Hui was astonishing, and most of them were quite strong. Even those who were mediocre in martial arts had some strange skills. However, Mount Hui spent a lot of money to give these guests a comfortable and luxurious life. If they wanted women, they gave them women. If they wanted secret manuals, they gave them secret manuals. But the important figures of Mount Hui had a clear account book in their bellies. There were only 7 or 8 people who really caught the eye of Bulldogong. Among these people, the chief guest Wang Fangfua and the second guest Hong Yu were the most worthy to be accepted. Hong Yu was the lame son of a nameless soldier. This person didn't disappoint Xianyuan Jingshuan's expectations. In Mount Hui blessed land, where geniuses were everywhere, his martial arts talent didn't lose to Xianyuan Jingshuan's. His cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. Because of Hong Yu's heroic character and heroic spirit, he was the most popular among the guests. Not only that, Hong Yu was also proficient in the art of war. After he was given the power to command the cavalry, he helped the entire second branch, which allowed the second branch to suppress the third branch. He could be said to be Xianyuan Jingshuan's lucky general. The chief guest of Mount Hui, Wang Fangfua, was the #1 martial artist in Jianghu. He was close to the realm of Grandmaster. When he encountered a big bottleneck in martial arts, he came to Mount Hui just to borrow secret manuals. Under normal circumstances, Bulldogong wouldn't ask Wang Fangfua to do anything. After all, guests weren't like the lackeys of the family who came and went as they pleased. These experts mostly followed the rules of guests who stayed and left if they didn't. Moreover, the most difficult people to serve in the world were the literati and experts. The originally arrogant and domineering Mount Hui was cultivated under Xianyuan Jingxian. For more than 10 years, they had been pursuing harmony and wealth. They didn't want to bully their customers. This unknowingly increased the status and arrogance of the guests, and their tempers became more and more crafty. How many people could be like Xianyuan Jingxian, who killed a concubine in order to win people's hearts? Wang Fangfo was also a very smart person. He was proficient in all kinds of martial arts. He had reached a higher level early and rarely met a worthy opponent in Jianghu. However, he was suppressed under the realm of Grandmaster. He couldn't understand why. During this period, he risked his life to go to the western regions and Beimang. However, he still couldn't reach the realm that seemed to be within reach. Finally, on the Spring God Lake, he had a sword discussion with Xianyuan Jingqi. They appreciated each other's talent and were invited to Mount Hui. Now, Huang Fangfo was the leader of the martial artists. He only treated Xianyuan Jingxian and Xianyuan Jingxian with respect, but didn't see each other with sincerity. Instead, he often drank wine and talked about history with the useless guy of the eldest branch. A big clan that was committed to dominating Jianghu naturally had its own petty interests. However, it also had a grand plan to look at the entire Jianghu. Huang Manor walked to the open space in the middle of the square with his bare hands. Xianyuan Jingqi had already received the news that this skinny young man had killed more than 10 people on his way up the mountain. Their hands and feet were all torn apart while they were still alive. Xianyuan Jingqi was the flag of Mount Hui when his ancestor and father weren't present. He lived like a prince in a high position. He cared about his face the most. He wanted to show his royal highness who was in his power. He coldly said, "Release the arrows." The bowstring released an ear-piercing buzzing sound. The arrows flew like locusts towards the young man who didn't know whether he was dead or alive. The first great initial realm of Vajra was derived from the teachings of Buddhism. It meant that the Buddha's body was immortal. The Vajra Dharma body was known as the strongest body in the 3 realms. Immortal Lu Dongxian once wrote a crooked poem, having obtained the 3 pure immortality technique, having obtained the Vajra Dharma body. He said that this poem was crooked because it mixed up Buddhism and Taoism. However, the younger generation didn't dare to look down on it. Thus, the Vajra realm was seen as the minor immortality realm in Taoism. It was to show the difference between great immortality and great immortality. Most of the pre-celestial cultivators who reached the Vajra realm used the energy in their body to borrow the power of the immovable Kunlun. They were invulnerable to weapons and axes. Below celestial phenomenon, the Vajra finger and Xian finger were the same. Li Chungang said that there were as many Vajra realm experts as there were hairs on a cow. He really overestimated the current Jianghu. It was because of His Royal Highness that ordinary people wouldn't be able to see a Vajra realm expert show off their skills. They wouldn't even be able to see a master realm expert who was only a step away from the first grade realm. The arrow drew an arc in the air and went straight for Huang Manor. A martial artist who was proficient in archery would be much more accurate and powerful than an ordinary archer. Xianyuan Jingyi squinted his eyes and waited quietly. The young man couldn't dodge in time and was shot like a porcupine. Hong Piao was born with a short stature. In terms of appearance, he wasn't very eye-catching. He was worlds apart from the head honcho Huang Fangfua. However, Hong Piao was bold and meticulous. He was a typical boorish man who could embroider. Seeing the rain of arrows flying towards him, he said worriedly, "Sir, I heard that old celestial master Zhao secretly took in a disciple. It's the young prince of Beiliang. His martial arts foundation is extraordinary. Could it be this person? If he angered Beiliang Palace and Mount Longhu at the same time, wouldn't there be endless trouble?" Xianyuan Jingyi laughed softly. "You guessed that he's the young prince of Beiliang, but I don't know. Moreover, since he's Xiao Shituan's disciple, he should have some power. Otherwise, do you really think that the Great Bull Gang is like the taverns and tea houses at the foot of the mountain that you can come and go as you please?" Xianyuan Jingyi and Hong Piao were both stunned. Chapter 306. The flying locusts fell from the sky aggressively. There was no sign of the young man's chi dynamic. He did not dodge and reached out to deflect a few arrows. Those that could not be deflected in time were shot at his body. However, the arrows that were shot at him were all broken as if they hit a metal rock. It was the result of hitting a rock with an egg. A few arrows that were calculated in the direction of the young man's escape hit the ground and created a burst of sparks. It was obvious that the archer's strength was great and the arrow's momentum was fierce. This made the scene even more strange. Since the young man did not use chi dynamic to strengthen his body, how could he deflect those arrows? The guests of Mount Hui who knew their stuff looked at each other in dismay. Huang Fong Fo said indifferently, "What a good-born Vajra state. In the past, I only heard the seniors talk about strange things and I did not dare to believe it. Today, I have opened my eyes." At the edge of the guests, there was a handsome man who was waving a fan in autumn. Although he had a pair of peach blossom eyes, there was an evil aura around him. There were more than 10 women painted on the front and back of the fan with their names and families written on it. There were more than 20 words to describe their romance. These women were all under his evil clutches. There were more than 10 fan of beauty and they were all carefully kept. They said that they were to be passed on to their descendants as family heirlooms. This self-proclaimed master of love and painting had been unrestrained in these years. If he had not poisoned a county chief's daughter 2 years ago and completely angered the government, he would not have come to Mount Hui to live under people's skin. The mountain was not as happy as the foot of the mountain. It was true that Mount Hui had beautiful mountains and clear waters and beautiful women, but this land's happiness was exclusive to the direct descendants of Shenyuan. He had been dissatisfied for a long time and complained a lot. This person's reputation was extremely bad. It was hard to imagine that such a perverted thief who everyone wanted to kill could write so many heroic poems that said, "Life is only 100 years, but to scold to one's heart's content for eternity." When he saw the young man who was said to be the heir of Bailiang with a sword, he was quite displeased. There were 2 kinds of people he hated the most in his life. One was ugly women who would dirty his eyes. The other was men who were more handsome than him. He could ignore the former, but the latter would most likely be tortured by him until they were disabled. The young man's strength was amazing, but he thought about it and saw that the young man's expression was dull and dull. He felt that he was just a brute. He was not afraid of this at all. To be a flower thief, the most important skill was to be able to escape. Therefore, his lightness skill could be ranked at the top of Mount Hui where there were many masters. He felt that staying in Mount Hui was really boring. Some of the beautiful women were divided up and could only be seen but not eaten. It was too annoying. Mount Hui was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Climbing over the wall to pick flowers was no different from suicide. It was better to go down the mountain and out of sight. 2 years had passed and he was almost out of the limelight. It was time for him to reappear in Jianghu. Those juniors who only knew how to secretly use aphrodisiac to ravage women were really a disgrace to him. Flowers were not to be picked like this. The highest level of flower picking was to pick them and enjoy them before planting them back in the pot. This way, they would be more delicate and beautiful than rashly breaking them and losing their vitality. Since he was going down the mountain, he had been eating and drinking well in the bull gang for 2 years. He had to return a favor. Today's situation was tricky. He was sure that many of the guests in Mount Hui were afraid of the king of Bailiang's name and did not dare to make a move. But he was different. Behind the mountain, I don't care if you're the king of heaven or a different surname. Huang Manor turned around and looked at Su Fingnian. After getting permission from his eyes, he started to run. You're not allowed to use such a desperate move like the Overlord's armor removal. If you can't beat us, then run. It's okay to lose face. As long as there's life, there's hope. Sooner or later, we'll be able to get back at you. His Royal Highness turned around and teased Bluebird. As he spoke, he felt a little regretful. It was a pity that Wenhua wasn't present. Otherwise, in such a lively scene, he might not be good at fighting, but his scolding skills were definitely at the peak. He could scold people until smoke came out of their 7 orifices. His 18 generations of ancestors, generation after generation, he wouldn't repeat half a word. Su Fingnian, who had learned a lot of verbal skills from the village women, had to admit that he was inferior and was unwilling to admit defeat. That year, when he met Xianyuan Qingfeng, whom he mistakenly thought was Xianyuan Qingfeng, it was nothing more than a fart of two debauches refusing to give way to a well-bred young lady. Fighting was nothing more than swallowing the humiliation. But that bastard Wenhua's mouth was really undisciplined and out of control. He called a dog his father and called her mother. He even spouted nonsense about how her armpit hair had a body odor that could smoke mosquitoes. He even did the vulgar action of taking off his pants and revealing his two buttocks in public. Even if Xianyuan Qingfeng was a bodhisattva with a good temper, he would still get angry and beat him up. This time, on this trip to Mount Hui, he didn't have Wenhua, who was comparable to a land immortal in terms of quarreling skills, to accompany him. Blue Bird held her spear and rushed out. Her figure wasn't as surprising as Huang manners. First, it was the foolish youth, then it was the delicate girl. Other than that old god of swords, Li Chungang, this Bailiang prince didn't have any other capable experts. Long Xuanyu followed the rules and asked Xianyuan Jingyi to fight. Almost at the same time, a guest elder with firm and fierce fist techniques also stepped out. Long Yuxuan saw the green-clothed female servant coming over with her spear. Xianyuan Jingyi didn't need him to say anything and signaled Long Yuxuan to deal with that impetuous girl. The youth was handed over to another guest elder to capture. The outcome was decided. Xianyuan Jingyi could be considered to have guessed the outcome, but the outcome was already decided on his side. Chapter 307. It was unknown if the guest elder, who was famous for his fist techniques, had underestimated him, but in just one exchange, he was forcefully blocked by that young man's fists. His body didn't move, but his feet sank deep into the shattered floor. Then, with a punch, the guest elder's head was chopped off. It wasn't accurate to say that it was chopped off, the entire head was smashed away by the young man. The scene was extremely bloody and cold. Long Yuxuan, who was laughing loudly and floating towards the lady in green, was about to tease her when he caught a glimpse of this scene from the corner of his eye. He was so frightened that he swallowed his words. As expected, the spear suddenly swung down and cut a 2-meter-long crack on the ground. Fortunately, he moved quickly. Otherwise, wouldn't that spear be like a watermelon being cut by a knife? That lady let the entire Mount Hui know what it meant to have a spear technique that was as strong as a swimming snake and explosive thunder. Long Xuanyu's Qinggong was undoubtedly excellent, but that red spear moved like a shadow. As long as the spear touched the ground, countless stones would be shattered. Even if it swept through the air, it would still make a whistling sound. The experienced and knowledgeable Huang Fangfo was once again shocked when he saw the young man who was born with Vajra. He muttered, "The spear immortal king embroidery has finally appeared. But that's fine, but how can a young lady be so domineering?" Su Fingnian had been glancing at the old man with the sheepskin fur coat. If he didn't take advantage of everyone's shock to take down the leader of the bandits, Xianyuan Chongyi, it would be a good opportunity to squander. Li Chungang rolled his eyes and said, "My heart aches for that daughter. This old man doesn't understand. You clearly care about her so much, so why don't you eat her up?" To a woman, this kind of care is the most practical. Su Fingnian flew into a rage out of humiliation. "Cut the crap, senior, make a move." The old god of swords raised his chin and said in annoyance, "Wait a while more, look over there." Su Fingnian looked in the direction and saw Xianyuan Qingfeng walking over slowly. She said to Xianyuan Chongyi in a clear voice, "My father invited His Royal Highness to Bull Hill to view the scenery and has already obtained the permission of the old ancestor." The moment she said that, there was a commotion. Xianyuan Chongyi frowned and said, "Qingfeng, don't mess around." It was obvious that he saw this niece's words as a fake imperial edict. Xianyuan Qingfeng said calmly, "Uncle, if you don't believe me, you can go and ask the ancestor yourself." Xianyuan Gong narrowed his eyes and smiled. That won't be necessary. However, His Royal Highness wants to make friends through martial arts. Let's wait until the fight is over. He turned to the second guest chamberlain and said, Brother Hong, are you going to spar with that junior? Only with you personally leading the formation will we be able to show the sincerity of Mount Hui's hospitality. Hong Piao was expressionless as he prepared to attack. Xianyuan Jingyi, on the other hand, was observing the subtle changes in his niece's expression from the corner of his eye. He didn't have any good feelings towards Xianyuan Qingfeng. As a woman, she wanted to seize power from him, her own uncle. She truly had a heart higher than the heavens and a life thinner than paper. Xianyuan Jingzong waited until she spoke and concluded that Yuan Tingshan, who was exhaling more than inhaling, had been abandoned by his niece. Instead, he had turned to cling to the thigh of the heir of Beiliang, hoping to borrow an external force to contend against the mansion of the old ancestor. However, did this infamous His Royal Highness have the ability to challenge the old ancestor? However, Xianyuan Jingyi understood his niece's feelings. After all, to any woman, entering and leaving Mansion of the Bull was a completely different world. Xianyuan Qingfeng's mind was already in turmoil, and she was wholeheartedly focused on smashing a broken jar. Naturally, she didn't care about Xianyuan Jingyi's erroneous guesses. In the backyard of the eldest branch, a young woman with a cold expression quietly watched the wine stove that was gradually heating up. The wine's name was Angelica, and it was sandwiched between tea leaves from Mount Hui's old tea before the rain, as well as osmanthus seeds picked every mid-autumn festival. The wine's color was golden and translucent, with a hint of green. The wine's aroma was a combination of tea and osmanthus. It was slightly bitter in the mouth, but when tasted carefully, it lingered for a long time with an endless aftertaste. This wine had the meaning of, after bitterness comes sweetness, but it wasn't popular in Mount Hui. Mount Hui was also known as Yaozhao Mountain. In the ancient book, Classic of Mountains and Seas, it was recorded that Yaozhao Mountain had many osmanthus trees. However, after the Xianyuan family occupied this blessed land, they enjoyed a peaceful life for several hundred years. Perhaps it was because their good fortune didn't last long, and their luck gradually decreased, causing the old osmanthus trees to die one by one. Last year, even the only remaining osmanthus tree named Tangue, which had a lifespan longer than the 1,600 years of the Taoist master's residence on Mount Longhu, had withered. Therefore, apart from a few jars of wine brewed from the osmanthus seeds last year, this Angelica osmanthus wine had become extinct. Everyone in Mount Hui knew that the eldest son of the first wife, Xianyuan Jingqing, was an absurd person who was addicted to drinking Angelica osmanthus wine from the books of the sages. The older generation remembered even more clearly that every year on Xianyuan Qingfeng's birthday, this scholar, who was once delusional enough to want to pass the imperial examinations and leave the mountain and was unwilling to practice martial arts, would bring his young daughter to Tangue to have his height carved. However, after the age of 15, the precocious Xianyuan Qingfeng treated this matter as a disgrace and didn't want to do it again. Thus, he drifted further and further away from his father. These years, only a handful of guests like Huangfang Buddha, who could be counted on one's fingers, had the good fortune to drink a jar of bitter osmanthus wine. Xianyuan Jingqing liked the bitter taste when he drank and lived up to his reputation as an eccentric. Every year, Xianyuan Jingqing brewed 3 jars of Angelica osmanthus wine. 2 jars were sent to the courtyard, and he only had 1 jar left. Therefore, he never had enough wine, but here, he never drank. He let the 2 jars of wine sit idle every year. Year after year, the more jars there were, the more mellow the aroma of the wine became. She finally opened a jar of wine and brought in a set of wine utensils that had been sealed for many years. The wine utensils were made by that man himself. In any case, other than practicing martial arts, that person seemed to be good at everything. Sitting alone, she filled a cup of wine and placed it on the table, as if she was hesitating whether to drink or not. She began to hate herself for no reason and reached out to slap the wine cup away. After a while, she stood up to retrieve the wine cup. Only then did she discover two small lines of words engraved at the bottom of the cup. The handwriting was clear and elegant. Life is bitter, so long as the right person returns. Chapter 308. Dark clouds loomed over the great snow plateau. A storm was coming. Do you want to shake Kunlun? After hearing his grandson Xianyuan Jingqing's words, Xianyuan Depan raised his head and laughed heartily. He did not mind the imminent battle. This was not because Xianyuan Depan was conceited. He counted the opponents that the hunchbacked old man had challenged before. When he was 20 years old, he challenged the family's ancestor and caused him to be seriously injured. When he was 30 years old, he fought the spear immortal Wang Xiao and was slightly inferior. When he was 40 years old, he single-handedly entered the sword tomb of the Wu family and forced the sword crown of that generation to use the flying sword technique. Although he was defeated, it was still a glorious defeat. After the Battle of the Sword Tomb, he comprehended swordsmanship for 10 years and was confident that his swordsmanship was comparable to that generation's sword god Li Chungang. Not to mention that Xianyuan Depan also competed with the immortal Qi Xuanjun during this period of time. It was natural that he was defeated. However, if his cultivation was ordinary, why would Qi Xuanjun, who had stayed on the demon-slaying platform all his life, fight? Xianyuan Depan seemed to have competed with others and lost every time. Therefore, he was mocked as Xianyuan Invincible. However, not to mention Qi Xuanjun, the only person in 500 years who could compete with Ancestor Lu, and Li Chungang, who was invincible in the secular world at that time, even the most inconspicuous Gu Jiantang now had extraordinary swordsmanship. If he claimed to be second, no one dared to claim to be first. In this way, how many people dared to underestimate this ancestor of the Xianyuan family? Xianyuan Depan had lived for nearly 100 years. He was different from Li Chungang, whose realm was declining day by day and eventually could not recover. Generally speaking, he had been steadily improving. People predicted that he had reached the celestial state when Xianyuan Depan was in charge of the dynasty. In these years, he had devoted himself to dual cultivation and devoted himself to fusing Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism into one. With Xianyuan Depan's age and strength, it was not impossible for him to reach the realm of earth immortal. After Qi Xuanjun ascended to immortality, there was no longer a Zhenren of this realm in Longhu Mountain. Once Xianyuan Depan achieved immortality, the hatred of the past would be returned to the ancestral court of Taoism. At that time, even if Gu Jintang's swordsmanship was superb, how could he be a match for an earth immortal? Those who were well-informed speculated about Li Chuangong's ascension. The one-armed old man wanted to use Xianyuan Depan to establish his authority. Most of them were not optimistic about the old god of swords, whose realm had declined greatly. The busybodies of Jianghu had specially placed bets on the outcome of Li Chungang and the various first pin masters. Without exception, the odds were extremely high, indicating that they did not have high hopes for Li Chungang. As for the odds against Wang Xianji and the new god of swords, Dong Tai, the odds were about 5,000 taels of silver on Li Chuangong's victory. Jianghu was forgetful and fickle, just like the saying that scholars despised each other since ancient times. Xianyuan Depan's 10 years of seclusion showed that his realm had improved greatly. His sideburns had turned from white to black. It was a clear proof that he had returned to his original state. It was a mysterious sign of becoming an immortal Zhenren. When Qi Xuanjun was slaying demons on Mount Longhu, he was 70 years old, but his appearance was as handsome as a young man. Xianyuan Depan was not in a hurry to make a move. He had waited for 20 years and finally, this day had come. Usually, as he got older, his patience would get better. Xianyuan Depan looked at his eldest grandson from afar, who was not tainted by worldly affairs. There was no emotion in his eyes. To him, blood relations could be heavy or light. If he was obedient and had the potential to become a dragon, then he would nurture him. If he was a good-for-nothing with mediocre roots, then even if he was his biological grandson, then he would simply abandon his intentions. Since when was Xianyuan Depan the kind of elder who liked to play with his grandson? The joy of family relationships was not worth mentioning compared to his own immortality. He made an exception and gave this eldest grandson whom he had high hopes for another chance. The first time was during Xianyuan Jingqing's coming-of-age ceremony. He asked him if he was willing to learn martial arts. Unfortunately, this stubborn child insisted on learning from Sun Ping of Zhejiang City. Xianyuan Depan was really amazed by this grandson's talent. Even if he was an unpolished jade for the rest of his life, it would be good to just leave him at home and collect dust. Later on, Xianyuan Jingqing met the woman in distress and returned to the mountain to beg for help from his family. Xianyuan Depan then gave him another chance. However, this grandson who had wasted his talent actually refused again. Xianyuan Depan was furious and no longer regarded him as his eldest grandson. He turned to nurture the less talented but ambitious Xianyuan Jingxian. Later on, that woman actually took the initiative to ask for dual cultivation. Xianyuan Depan was just going with the flow. Since he had decided to abandon Xianyuan Jingqing, it was fine to have a young granddaughter-in-law who was suitable to be a human cauldron. Xianyuan Pan looked indifferently at the tornado that was attracted by Xianyuan Jingqing's abundant qi. It was in the shape of a giant funnel, and the root of the wind spun violently on the great snow plateau as if it reached the heavens. It continuously tore down the black clouds in the sky, becoming more and more intense. Xianyuan Jingqing stretched out one hand and drew an arc, while his other hand slowly lifted upwards. He said softly, "Rise again." Another huge tornado appeared in the sky on the left side of the great snow plateau. The phenomenon of heaven and earth revolved around the dragon axis, causing endless wind and sand to blow. In one go, Xianyuan Jingqing's aura skyrocketed, but it did not show any signs of weakening. He clenched his hands into fists, and his qi instantly climbed to the peak. He said slowly, "Rise 3 times." A tornado appeared on the right side. On the great snow plateau, 3 dragons draw water. Xianyuan Pan's gray hair was messed up by the strong wind. He said calmly, "Stealing the power of heaven and earth, is this your heavenly phenomenon stage? This kind of opportunistic behavior is fine for scaring people, but if you want to hurt me, it's really laughable." Xianyuan Jingqing did not say anything. The 3 tornadoes surged with heaven's might and quickly moved towards the motionless Xianyuan Pan. The 3 dragons suddenly converged and pressed down on ancestor Huishan, who was in the center and did not bother to dodge. Good timing. Xianyuan Pan laughed loudly. His hands hooked into claws, and his left hand reached out into the 2 tornadoes. The vast sea of qi that contained the accumulation of nearly 100 years of internal energy began to exert its power, rolling like a boiling boiler. The reason why he looked down on Xianyuan Jingqing's heavenly ability was related to Xianyuan Pan's own cultivation. Generally speaking, the saints of the 3 sects each left behind bits and pieces of information for the future generations to figure out the great Tao. Among them, Zhang Suxing of the North proposed that reading books would nourish the righteous energy of heaven and earth, and also said that if the great people did not live in peace, they would be famous. Therefore, the experts who entered the great realm of martial arts through Confucianism were extremely good at resonating with heaven and earth, and using their own strength to stir up heaven's secrets. This was undoubtedly an extremely grand and magnificent scene, but in the eyes of Xianyuan Pan, who used strength to prove his Tao, it was just a joke. This ancestor did not worship heaven and earth as a master, and only believed in his own 2 fists. He was the same as Li Chungang, who wanted to make the world tremble and gods weep when he used his sword. All the talk about not being able to achieve Tao and floating on the sea, and all the talk about suffering in this world and blessings in the future were all nonsense. The more Xianyuan Pan studied the profound meaning of the 3 sects, the more firm he was in his original path. He had 2 hands, and even the immortals, Buddhas, demons, and demons had to obediently retreat and get lost. Moreover, Xianyuan Pan had a clear goal, which proved that the path he chose was not only feasible, but but also extremely correct. Wang Xianji of the martial emperor city. In today's world, there were only a handful of people who could fight with him, Xianyuan Pan. Xianyuan Jingqing, the useless abandoned son of the family, was not worthy. Xianyuan Pan actually tore apart the two tornadoes. Without the foundation of the waterspouts, the black clouds at the top of the tornadoes slowly rolled as if they were dying, and finally drifted away and returned to the sky. Just as he was dealing with the last waterspout, Xianyuan Jingqing tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and a large pit was blasted out of the ground. His figure was like a long rainbow, piercing through the tornadoes, and then came to the front of Xianyuan Pan, and pushed out with his palm. Xianyuan Pan, who was not surprised, sneered, and changed his claw into a fist, and went straight for the center. Xianyuan Jingqing turned his palm sideways, ignoring the turbulent fist force, and only placed it on the back of his fist. Xianyuan Pan's face changed slightly, and he retracted his right fist, while his left hand stuck to the middle of the bridge of his hand, trying to remove this wrist. Unexpectedly, Xianyuan Jingqing changed his grip in an instant, and pressed down diagonally, while his left hand fiercely slapped Xianyuan Pan's shoulder. This attack seemed to be played down, but it disrupted the center of gravity of the ancestor whose inner strength had already reached the point of perfection. His body was thrown forward, but Xianyuan Pan was adept at facing the enemy, and he borrowed the momentum to smash his shoulder against Mount Tai, and smashed the chest of this eldest grandson of the first wife who had a strange technique. However, the expressionless Xianyuan Jingqing changed his grip again, and pushed Xianyuan Pan back to his original position. For a moment, the latter only had the rare bravery in the world, but he could not move, nor could he stay still. All of this happened in the blink of an eye, and both sides had switched from offense to defense. Xianyuan Jingqing pushed out with his palm again, and Xianyuan Pan accurately calculated the speed of his palm. He countered with an even fiercer elbow strike, but he did not expect that Xianyuan Jingqing's palm strike, which was originally like a needle hidden in silk floss, would explode the moment it was about to touch Xianyuan Pan's elbow strike, and his palm strike was even fiercer and faster than Xianyuan Pan's elbow strike, and it landed on Xianyuan Pan's chest. Ripples that could be seen with the naked eye appeared between the two of them because of this palm strike. Xianyuan Pan's tall and sturdy body was pushed back 100 feet. The wind chimes that had been pulled taut all this while finally could not bear the burden and fell to the ground. Xianyuan Pan, who was known for his bravery and fierceness in the world, was actually pushed back. Chapter 309. At this moment, an old man carrying a sword slowly walked onto the snowy plains. He wasn't the least bit surprised by this shocking scene. Lowering his head, he said in a clear voice, "Father, Xianyuan Jingxian has been killed by Xianyuan Jingqing." Xianyuan Pan hummed indifferently. He looked thoughtfully at Xianyuan Jingqing, who clearly wanted to commit treason to the end. He asked, "How many moves did it take to kill your third brother, who had just entered the profound finger realm?" Xianyuan Jingqing, who had been expressionless all this time, suddenly smiled. He coughed a few times and covered his mouth. Smiling vaguely, he said, "We agreed beforehand that I would kill him with the profound finger realm. However, I actually used the heavenly phenomenon realm. That's why it was only one move." The ancient sword at Xianyuan Guiqi's waist wailed incessantly, his expression furious. Xianyuan Pan nodded. "Your last palm strike just now was also the same. Everything before was merely a diversion." Xianyuan Jingqing, whose face was as white as snow, said indifferently, "Insignificant skill. Of course, it can't slay the evil flood dragon. Dare I ask if old ancestor's hand is warm? If it is, Jingqing will no longer be polite." Xianyuan Guiqi, who was watching from the side, was stunned. Xianyuan Pan let out a burst of joyful laughter that came from the bottom of his heart. Pointing at Xianyuan Jingqing, he said, "You brat, arrogant to the point of being adorable. You are worthy of being the one I think most highly of in the entire Insignia Mountain. Truly a pity." Xianyuan Jingqing covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Raising his head to look at the rolling black clouds, he softly said, "When I was young, I read that an ant trying to shake a large tree was laughable and overconfident. At the time, I only thought it was laughable. Later, after careful consideration, I thought that changing the word laughable to respectful was not bad. An ant trying to shake a large tree was laughable and overconfident?" Of the 3 generations of Insignia Mountain, Xianyuan Jingxian was already a dead man, and Xianyuan Jingqing was also about to die. Xianyuan Jingqing retracted his gaze. With one hand behind his back and the other extended, he loudly said, "Xianyuan Jingqing invites old ancestor to die." Xianyuan Guiqi was immediately frightened speechless. When had his sickly cat-like eldest son become a fierce tiger that could bite and fight with his father, Xianyuan Pan? Insignia Mountain, which boasted of enjoying the blessings of the continent, was unable to escape the fate of 2 tigers. On the snowy plains of Mount, a storm. Over at the east sect, Xianyuan Jingyi was truly enraged. Especially after his niece, Xianyuan Qingfeng, had come to stir things up, adding fuel to the fire. Did that sloppy young heir really think that he had come to Mount Hui to enjoy the scenery? My Mount Hui and our neighbor, Mount Longhu, are mutually supporting each other. Even Prince Xiao Yi of Guangling, who is second to none in the southeast of the empire, dares to defy us. You, who has roots far away in Beiliang, and His Royal Highness, who has yet to inherit the throne, dares to behave atrociously here. It was true that he was wary of this Beiliang dragon, but he wasn't really afraid of him. The one that Xianyuan Jingyi didn't dare to use his full strength to crush wasn't Su Fingnian, who only had skin and a title. It wasn't even Li Chungang, who was still ranked 8th in the world. It was that crippled butcher. Xianyuan Jingyi cast a sidelong glance at Xianyuan Qingfeng and coldly snorted. This little bitch who lives off others while helping others. As expected of the daughter of that shameless woman. She wants to borrow power to reverse the decline of the first wife's branch. As a little bitch, she doesn't feel ashamed to show her face in public. First, it was that uncouth brat from the countryside, Yuan Tingshan. Then, she threw flirtatious glances at the influential Song family. Now, she's even seduced the heir of Beiliang, who has a terrible reputation. The Xianyuan family's reputation has been completely lost. Xianyuan Jingyi's expression turned warm. He turned his head and smiled at the guest that he relied on the most. "I've troubled Brother Hong." Hong Yu indifferently replied, "It's my duty." Huang Manor, who had smashed the guest's head with a single punch, had nothing better to do. From time to time, he would stretch out his leg and kick the headless corpse's hand. Everyone from Mount Hui felt their hair stand on end. The youth, who was born with unparalleled physical strength, grinned when he saw Hong Yu step out. At this moment, the head steward of the second branch hurriedly ran over. A guest that had been worshipped by the third branch had ill intentions and tripped him. The steward fell flat on his face. He didn't even care about glaring at the guest and only cared about getting up and rushing to his master, Xianyuan Jingyi's side. For some reason, this steward felt a chill run down his spine. His lips trembled as he stood on tiptoe and whispered in his ear, "Third master is dead." Xianyuan Jingyi thought he had misheard and frowned. "What did you say?" The steward's body trembled as he repeated in a trembling voice, "Third master, Xianyuan Jingxian is dead." Xianyuan Jingyi's eyes widened, but he immediately suppressed his shock and tried his best to remain calm. "How did he die?" The steward, who seemed to be trying to resist the chill of early autumn, covered his chest with his hands and lowered his head. "First Madam said that Xianyuan Jingqing killed him." Xianyuan Jingyi finally couldn't hold back his anger. "Bullshit." The steward said with a sullen face, "It's true. Third master's corpse is still lying in the courtyard. No one dares to touch it." Xianyuan Qingfeng, who was well aware of the situation, sneered. She had never felt so carefree and happy before. His Royal Highness, whose nature was to wish for the world to be in chaos, was moved when he saw this scene. Blue Bird was currently chasing after the man with the fan like a stray dog. Su Fengnian laughed loudly. Blue Bird, come back, come back. This great bull gang's backyard is already on fire. Xianyuan Jingqing killed Xianyuan Jingxian. Brothers killing each other is lamentable unlamentable. The crowd was in an uproar. The guests weren't blind. Aside from a few martial fanatics who didn't know much about the world, most of them were shrewd people. When they connected the dots with Xianyuan Jingyi's abnormal behavior, they knew that the Bailiang heir's earth-shattering words weren't too far from the truth. Was the towering tree of Mount Hui going to fall? When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. Those who ran too slowly would be crushed to death by the tree. Especially those who tied their lives to the tree branches with ropes. They were destined to die the most miserable deaths. But would it fall? Would Mount Hui really change? Almost everyone didn't believe it. Even if Xianyuan Jingqing really did kill Xianyuan Jingxian, as long as the Grand Ancestor was present, the situation wouldn't change. As for how Xianyuan Jingqing killed Grandmaster Xianyuan Jingxian, no one could figure it out no matter how hard they racked their brains. They might as well not think about it. Instead, they turned their attention to His Royal Highness, who had caused a huge commotion as soon as he came up the mountain. Some of the more quick-witted guests of the martial arts world were secretly considering whether or not they could latch on to Bailiang Palace. There were many secret manuals in Mount Hui, but could there be more than the Tide Harp Pavilion? Grand Ancestor Xuanyuan's martial arts were profound and boundless, but in the end, he couldn't jump out of Jianghu. No matter how big Jianghu was, it was nothing compared to the king of Bailiang, who had coldly looked down on Jianghu from horseback in the past. The situation suddenly went completely out of control. Look! What's going on over at the snowy plains? Could it be a tornado created by human power? Good heavens, this is 3 dragons drinking water. Could it be that the Grand Ancestor has come out of seclusion? Is he going to ascend? Xianyuan Jingqing turned his head to look, his face dark and livid. Su Fengnian struck while the iron was hot and spouted nonsense. Hey, old man Xian named Yuan Jingjing, if you don't let this Shitzi pass, everyone will miss a good show that is hard to come by in 100 years. Xianyuan Qingfeng very tactfully added flowers to the brocade and calmly said, Uncle, His Highness came up the mountain at my father's invitation and has the Grand Ancestor's permission. Xianyuan Jingqing was hesitant. Dirty linen shouldn't be aired in public. If he let that jinx pass, he would lose face. But if he insisted on a deadlock and allowed the heir to slander him, the hearts of the people of Mount Hui would be shaken. Wait a minute. Xianyuan Jingqing's mind immediately turned. If what the steward said was true, then his third brother Xianyuan Jingxian was already dead, his eldest brother had gone to the snowy plains to seek his own death, and his father Xianyuan Guiqi had no intention of becoming the head of the family. In the future, when the Grand Ancestor ascended to immortality, who would be in charge of Mount Hui? It was truly a case of searching high and low for something, only to find it by chance. Xianyuan Jingqing was overjoyed, but he still looked like he was in a dilemma. Everyone held their breaths, patiently waiting for Xianyuan Jingqing's decision. Is it going to rain? Su Fengnian looked up at the sky, then turned to Xianyuan Jingqing with a smile. Let me pass, and an umbrella. That won't be difficult, right? Xianyuan Jingqing's face was angry, but he clearly took a step back. He calmly ordered the steward beside him, go get an umbrella. Su Fengnian brought all of his men to the snowy plains, but Xianyuan Jingqing only brought his 2 trusted aides, Wang Fangfua and Huang Fangfua. Xianyuan Qingfeng brought up the rear. Some scenes that she thought she had long forgotten suddenly appeared vividly in her mind. That man who mocked himself for being tasteless if he didn't read for a day, had personally taught her how to read, saying that as long as she opened a book, it would be beneficial, but she didn't need to understand it. He taught her how to write, and said that at the beginning of the book, she could use clever phrases to attract people's attention, causing them to be amazed at first sight, but it didn't matter if she started strong but finished weak. He had once let his young self ride on his neck, saying with a smile that dogs don't bark well, and humans don't speak well. If she wanted to be a good person, she should learn from dogs. At that time, Xianyuan Qingfeng was still young and didn't understand anything. When she reached an age where she could understand, she only had prejudice and contempt for him because she was too stubborn. All these years, she only had disdain and ridicule for his poems and essays. If I don't open my mouth first when spring comes, which bug dares to make a sound? Easy to rise and easy to fall, easy to be left and right, easy to be a fence-sitter, easy to reverse, easy to overturn a petty person's heart. Eating tea and eating food is suffering, being able to eat is a blessing, eating more is beneficial. Now that she read and thought about it again, Xianyuan Qingfeng couldn't help but cry. The snowy plains were cloudy with wind and rain, with lightning flashing and thunder rumbling. The torrential rain poured down, splashing on the heads of the group. Mount Hui seemed to have run out of luck. Chapter 3:10. The group quickly walked towards the snowy plains. The closer they got, the more violent the wind and thunder became. It was as if 10,000 horses were galloping, causing a piercing pain in their eardrums. Blue Bird held the kana in one hand and the umbrella in the other. Her expression was the same as usual. The old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat probably felt that this matter had nothing to do with him, so he walked rather lazily and leisurely, allowing the rain to fall on his body. With the old god of swords' vigorous internal energy, it wasn't difficult for him to keep the wind and rain away from him. However, for Li Chungang, this kind of gaudy expert demeanor wasn't something that could be faked. One umbrella couldn't block the wind and rain. The hem of Su Fingnian's brocade gown had long been soaked, and his boots were almost enough to raise a few small fish. He raised his hand into the rain and pushed the umbrella towards Blue Bird. However, he hadn't taken more than a few steps when Blue Bird quietly moved back. Half of her body was exposed to the rain. Su Fingnian was so angry that he laughed and took the umbrella. He hugged Blue Bird's slender shoulders and held the umbrella together. Xianyuan Qingfeng had been in a daze the entire way, swaying and falling. Her cultivation in martial arts had always been mediocre. The rain of soybeans slapped on her cold and elegant face, making her look extremely pitiful. Su Fingnian turned around and glanced at her. He didn't pity her at all. To be honest, he didn't have any irreconcilable enmity with this woman. It was just that he had bumped into a knife's edge when he was traveling back in the day and had a small grudge with her. In addition, the Xianyuan family was a big tree that attracted the wind. His Royal Highness couldn't get along with others, so he naturally wouldn't bicker with ordinary people. After a few rounds, he had picked Xianyuan Qingfeng and Hui Shan. Moreover, every time when Hua mentioned this daughter of a wealthy family, he would always gnash his teeth. As brothers forged in times of trouble, Su Fengnian had to vent his anger no matter what. He remembered that when Su Fengnian was playing wild chess to earn money, when Hua would pretend to be a chess player to win some copper coins, so as to lure the spectators into the trap. When Su Fengnian quarreled with others, he would say that a gentleman uses his mouth and not his fists. He would appear to be trying to mediate the fight, but he would shout with all his might to stop the fight, but in reality, he would kick those bastards who lost in chess but refused to pay up. Usually, after a fight, the other party would inexplicably suffer countless monkey plucking peaches or black tiger digging out the heart. Their entire body would be covered with Wan Hua's footprints. When they finally came back to their senses, they were already lying on the ground without the strength to fight back. As for Wen Hua, he admired Su Fengnian from the bottom of his heart. He remembered that once at the Lantern Festival in Lu Province, the two fellows saw a young lady in front of them. Her waist was really thin, so thin that it made people worry that her waist would be broken if they twisted it. Su Fengnian made a bet with Wen Hua that he could hug Gu Liang's small waist without being hit. How could Wenhua be willing to believe it? As a result, Su Fengnian indeed openly put his hand on that young lady's small waist and even intimately whispered something into her ear. After that, Wenhua's eyeballs almost fell to the ground. That young lady first glared angrily at Su Fengnian, but after hearing what he said, her eyes instantly became as gentle as water. She only glared fiercely at Wenhua, but she did not struggle free. Su Fengnian immediately let go of that seductive small waist and chatted and laughed with the young lady. His hand, however, made a kneading gesture on her small perky buttocks for Wenhua to see. Until now, Wenhua still did not know how Su Fengnian did it. In fact, it was very simple. Su Fengnian told that young lady that Wenhua behind her was a perverted thief with bad intentions. He was protecting the flower. The pitiful Wenhua had looked at every woman in the past with eyes full of lust. Let alone a perverted thief, even if he was a great perverted thief who mercilessly destroyed a flower, the young lady still believed him without a doubt. Su Fengnian hugged Bluebird's damp shoulders tightly and said with a soft laugh, "You called me young master when a few times. Wenhua will really remember you for many years." Bluebird gave a puzzled grunt. Su Fengnian turned his head and stared at her face that could be considered delicate, but he never got tired of looking at it. He smiled and said, "It's nothing. My mind accidentally went astray." Xianyuan Jingyi walked at the very front, the little abacus in his stomach crackling loudly and loudly. After his eldest brother had caused the death of Xianyuan Jingxian, who was at the Grand Master realm, he still dared to come to Bull's Descent Snow Plateau. Even if he brought a bramble to ask for punishment, he still wouldn't be able to get anything out of it. The old ancestor's temperament was hard to predict, but there was no doubt that he liked to seek revenge for the smallest grievance and to weigh the benefits extremely well. His eldest brother, Xianyuan Jingqing, had obviously studied to the point that he had become a cripple. It was one thing for him to be content with his useless studies, but how could the old ancestor easily forgive him for using some unknown method to kill his third brother, whom he had placed such high hopes on? That niece of his who was fiercely siding with outsiders was acting abnormally. There was a suspicion that a broken jar would be smashed. In Mount Hui, how could a woman have the slightest chance to stand out? Grand Guest Elder Huang Fangfu's expression was calm, but Hong Piao, on the other hand, seemed to be distressed. Xianyuan Jingyi didn't pay attention to these minor details. Stepping onto the snow plateau, Xianyuan Jingyi immediately caught sight of the old ancestor's imposing figure. His qi leaked out violently like a tide, as if he was holding up a large umbrella, repelling the raindrops from 3 feet away from him. He then looked at his eldest brother, Xianyuan Jingqing, who was standing in the field like a drowned rat, covering his mouth and coughing. You Confucian scholars scrupulously abide by the words of the northern sage Zhang, who said that you should cultivate your body, govern the country, and bring peace to the world. But let me ask you, Xianyuan Jingqing, what kind of body do you cultivate, what kind of family do you govern? After living your whole life, you can't even protect your wife and daughter. Other people reincarnate to be free and unfettered. Ha, it's fine if you don't reincarnate. The wind whistled at the top of the mountain, but old ancestor Xuanyuan's arrogant laughter was even more ear-piercing. According to common sense, Xianyuan Jingqing was far from 50 years old. It was appropriate to say that he had lived half his life, but Xianyuan Great Plate said that he had lived his whole life. It was obvious that he had seen through Xianyuan Jingqing's method of fighting for the realm at the cost of his life. Moreover, the old ancestor didn't intend to let this scholarly and crafty junior continue to live. It was enough for Mount Hui to have one land immortal. What was the point of enjoying the land immortal alone? If there were two, what kind of scandal would it be? How could he enjoy the land immortal alone? If Xianyuan Jingqing was willing to practice martial arts according to his wishes, Xianyuan Great Plate wouldn't mind letting him take over Mount Hui after he ascended. But if Xianyuan Jingqing could compete for the land immortal in his lifetime, Xianyuan Great Plate would definitely strangle him. It would be best if I could ascend. If I worked hard for 100 years to seek immortality without any results, after I died, who would care about the rise and fall of the family. My children and grandchildren would have their own fortune. Whether it was glory or disgrace, I, Xianyuan Great Plate, wouldn't care about this damn thing. When Xianyuan Jingqing heard this, he finally ate a pill of reassurance. There was no deviation in the development of the situation. This time, the old ancestor wouldn't tolerate his big brother's misdeeds. He was curious about how his big brother could kill Xianyuan Jingxian, who had already entered the finger-profound realm. Xianyuan Jingqing believed that he had the right time, place, and people to sit in charge of Mount Hui, but he still couldn't do it. Xianyuan Jingqing inadvertently saw his father's expression and was shocked. Why was his father so serious? Then Xianyuan Jingqing said something that made Xianyuan Jingqing sluggish. Heaven's evil can be forgiven, but the evil you bring upon yourself is the hardest to bear. Today, Xianyuan Jingqing was only enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens and sweeping away the 500 years of accumulated dust of Mount Hui. As for how much can be swept away, that would depend on the will of the heavens. In half a cup of tea's time, you exchanged 216 moves with the old ancestor as a heavenly image cultivator. Does the old ancestor have any chance of winning? Why use words to boost your courage? Xianyuan Great Plate, who had already accumulated power in Mount Hui for 60 years, was very calm. He said tit for tat, "You did your best without regard for your life, but did you ever hurt me?" Xianyuan Jingqing, who was dressed as a middle-aged scholar, smiled faintly. The old ancestor walked on the martial path for nearly 100 years. To Mount Hui, even if there was no merit, there was still hard work. If Xianyuan Jingqing won easily after 20 years of observation, the old ancestor would die unwillingly. Xianyuan Jingqing only felt that this big brother of his had lost his mind. But very quickly, Xianyuan Jingqing felt a monstrous chill fill his bones. Exchanged 200 moves with the old ancestor? Xianyuan Jingqing suddenly turned his head and said, "Third brother respected Xianyuan Jingqing because of charm, second brother respected you because of slyness. Both are not righteous. The sins of the heavens can be forgiven, but the sins of one's own making are the hardest to bear." Xianyuan Great Plate said with a ferocious expression, "I want to see what other tricks you can play." Xianyuan Jingqing said calmly, "Jingqing has been observing for 20 years. I hope that today will be the day when I have accumulated enough. I definitely won't disappoint the old ancestor. Since everyone is here, Jingqing will go first. If the old ancestor still wants to hide and suppress your cultivation at medium heavenly image, be careful that you won't have the chance to reach great heavenly image." Xianyuan Great Plate sneered, "Oh. You caused such a big commotion, and even that woman with broken shoes didn't come to watch. You can't wait to go to the Yellow Springs Road. Could it be that you can't hold on until then? Your method is mysterious, but it's much more unorthodox than mine." Without waiting for the old ancestor to finish speaking, Xianyuan Jingqing rudely stopped listening. Instead, he turned his head and looked at his daughter from afar. This scholar had an open-minded smile on his face. Cultivating one's body was the correct heart. Scholar Mo Dao didn't have the courage to ask the heavens and earth to sink into the sea. Successful people didn't only have extraordinary talents, they also had to have a tenacious will. Xianyuan Jingqing's mind flashed by, and those poems and essays appeared one by one. "I've become a land immortal." Xianyuan Jingqing closed his eyes. He was bleeding from his 7 orifices, but his expression was calm as he spread out his hands. It was as if he wanted to encompass the entire world. With him as the center, the accumulated water on the snowy plains exploded outwards. In that instant, 9 bolts of lightning came from the heavenly court. Li Chungang, who had been silent all this time, sighed, "How is this kid a Confucian scholar? He's clearly a Confucian saint." Chapter 3:11. The heavenly thunder was as thick as a tree. In the blink of an eye, it was projected onto the great snow plateau, exploding 9 large holes. Fortunately, the spectators were all safe and sound. The Great Snow Plateau was divided into two parts by the Confucian scholar Xianyuan Jingqing. The 9 purple serpent-like thunder and lightning struck the great ancestor Xuanyuan's side. The old man was so arrogant that he didn't even try to dodge. His fist, which was as big as a bowl, smashed towards one of the purple thunder pillars. Upon contact, the earth trembled and the mountains shook. The great ancestor Huishan stood firm, but one of his sleeves was burned to ashes. The remaining purple thunder and lightning flickered, making him look like a divine general of thunder. Xianyuan Guiqi's strength was outstanding and his realm was profound. He had already understood the mandate of heaven, but after seeing this scene, his heart was still in turmoil. In Mount Hui, only he was qualified to say a few words to the cold-hearted Great Snow Plateau. However, he was still far from being on equal footing. Even if Xianyuan Guiqi was a great grandmaster of swordsmanship, he still had to be submissive and respectful in front of the Great Snow Plateau. Before the destruction of the Forbidden Villa, Huishan Xianyuan was known as the North Gashu and the South Xianyuan. His martial arts foundation was very long, and he learned a lot from many people. Other than a few exquisite and unique mental cultivation methods, the elders mostly taught the younger generation according to their aptitude. Xianyuan Guiqi was known as having an innate sword embryo since he was young, so he started to practice swordsmanship early. Now, there were 3 people in the current generation with the surname Jing. According to the custom, when they were 1 year old, they had to grab a book. The 3 people were different. Xianyuan Jingqing grabbed a book called The Spring and Autumn Annals, while Xianyuan Jingxian and Xianyuan Jingxian grabbed 2 martial arts secret manuals. In the next generation, because there were many children, it became more and more complicated. Xianyuan Qingfeng grabbed a jade rui, while Xianyuan Jinggong's eldest son, Xianyuan Qingmong, picked a string of bells. There were all kinds of strange things. Su Fingnian was about to ask when the old god of swords tilted his head and scratched his ear. It seemed that he did not feel any sense of accomplishment because he could not dig out the earwax. He said in a bad mood, "Open your eyes and watch carefully. The next 2 people are competing with something that can't be bought with money. Their moves may be ordinary, but after returning to the basics, it is nothing more than simplification. However, the flow of qi and timing are the key. For swordsmen like us, in the end, the sword is nothing more than a horizontal, vertical, and diagonal slash. Why is it that ordinary people use swords so inflexible, but brilliant swordsmen can generate upstanding qi? Sword immortals can fly and cut off heads. Once the sword is thrust, unless it is done with all its might and is as fast as it can be. Otherwise, once the qi circulates, although it seems fast, it will suddenly slow down, causing the opponent's expected counterattack to miss. When he changes, he will suddenly increase his speed. If he changes again, even if he can make it in time, he will lose his initial momentum. This is the most common and simple principle. When experts exchange blows, fighting strength is the foundation. Among them, a battle of wits, courage, and ruthlessness is the most exciting part. I remember that when the number 1 expert of the Bei Mang went to the 2 Zen temples, he was stopped by the white-robed monk. The 2 of them did not seem to have truly exchanged blows. They did not make a single move and just stood there motionless. One of them was a martial sage, and the other could have been the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva of Buddhism. They could not be dozing off in a daze, right? But why didn't the son of the Bei Mang, who had reached the pinnacle of martial arts, make a move? This is the true beauty of the Vajra realm. The so-called first-grade Vajra realm experts of today's world are far inferior. Isn't the dead Xianyuan Jingxian known as the Vajra invincible finger? Invincible Vajra my ass. Xianyuan Jingqing abruptly used his qi to forcefully soar into the sky. After the 9 thunderbolts, there were bursts of heavenly thunder. In an instant, a strange phenomenon appeared. The water met the purple thunder. Li Chungang narrowed his eyes and said, "Little Su, if you don't want your retainers to be implicated and end up dying an unnatural death, then hurry up and get them to retreat." This old man only promised to protect your life. As for the others, the heavenly thunder is rolling down in a chaotic manner. This old man does not have the patience to block the natural disaster for them. Su Fingnian waved his hand, indicating that everyone except for Huang Manor and Blue Bird should retreat from the Great Snow Plateau. Xianyuan Jingqing and the two esteemed guests were shaken. Even though they were used to big scenes, at this moment, their faces were extremely pale. Especially Xianyuan Jingqing, who felt guilty in his heart. He was simply overwhelmed. Big Brother's words of "I will become an earthly immortal" were more than 1,000 words of warning and threat. Earthly immortal realm. In the 100 years of the pugilistic world, other than Qi Xuanzhen of Mount Longhu, who was publicly recognized as a heavenly talent in his youth, even Wang Xianji, who occupied the second place in the world for 60 years in Martial Emperor City, only dared to guess if she had such a divine ability. It could be seen how rare this earthly immortal realm was. The most mysterious thing was that this earthly immortal realm was far from what other first stage 3 realms could guess. In the past 500 years, there were some heaven-defying geniuses who had once reached the peak. However, they usually could not last long. It was like a swan stepping on snow and mud. They would occasionally leave a claw on the mud and quickly return to heavenly phenomenon. There were very few who directly ascended like Qi Xuanzhen. This was also why Qi Xuanzhen was regarded as the only immortal who could rival Ancestor Lu in the past 500 years. On the plateau, Xianyuan Jingqing once again surprised everyone. He gave up what was close at hand and went for what was far away. He fought with old Ancestor Xianyuan in close combat. Xianyuan Jingqing and Xianyuan Pan rushed forward together. The latter's figure was in a straight line, and the wind and rain were swept away. He leaped up and hit Xianyuan Jingqing with his knee. Xianyuan Jingqing pressed his hands on old Ancestor's knee and slid back, causing countless splashes. This Confucian scholar who had already transcended mortality did not want to dissipate this tyrannical force. Instead, he pushed to the side. Xianyuan Pan's burly body was still in the air. Xianyuan Jingqing leaned forward and smashed down with his elbow, smashing old Ancestor's body onto the plateau. This was not enough. He kicked out and sent Xianyuan Pan flying more than 100 feet away. Xianyuan Jingqing took advantage of the situation and chased after him. Xianyuan Pan was kicked away. His 5 fingers dug into the ground and suppressed the momentum of his defeat. He clapped his palms and finally got up. When Xianyuan Jingqing closed in, he punched out with both fists. Xianyuan Jingqing, with an indifferent expression, met his opponent's fists with both hands and held them firmly. His figure stood tall and did not fall. A large space behind him had already been compressed by the enormous qi dynamic, causing the wind and rain to evaporate in an instant. Xianyuan Jingqing raised his hand and said softly, "Send old Ancestor to heaven." Xianyuan Pan's body soared into the sky. Heavenly lightning struck down from the sky. A loud boom. Xianyuan Jingqing, who was standing on the ground, did not show any mercy after gaining the upper hand. He clapped his palms together in front of him. The accumulated water at the edge of the plateau that was originally flowing down the mountain surged up like 2 green dragons. The 2 dragons pierced through the sky of the plateau. Xianyuan Pan, who was in the air in a hurry to operate his sea of qi to resist the heavenly lightning, was blasted until he no longer had the strength to move. Xianyuan Jingqing tapped his toes and his figure soared into the air. He grabbed old Ancestor Xuanyuan's belt and landed on the ground. He ran quickly. After running for 200 feet, his legs suddenly stopped. He threw Xianyuan Pan straight to the west, as if he wanted to throw this old Ancestor Huishan off the plateau. Send him to heaven in one go. When Xianyuan Pan's body was about to fly out of the cliff of the plateau, he unexpectedly fell and landed on the edge of the cliff. Finally, the rainwater could not wash away the bloodstains on his face. He no longer had the calm and composed demeanor of a great master. Chapter 312. The old man was enduring, waiting for the eldest grandson of the first wife to exhaust his life to enter the realm of immortals from the side door. Xianyuan de Pan's celestial state was achieved step by step. As long as his meridians were not depleted, his sea of qi would not be exhausted. However, Xianyuan Jingqing, who was determined to destroy his sect, was different. Taking a shortcut was like building a pavilion in the sky. No matter how majestic it looked when it was built, there would be a moment when it would collapse. Xianyuan Pan took a deep breath. His chest and abdomen were burning with pain. It had been many years since he had encountered such a terrifying injury to his heart. It had been so long that he had almost forgotten about this pain. The last time was when he competed with Qi Xuanjin on the demon-slaying platform. As for Gu Jiantang and the others, their so-called loss was only in a move or two. Since they did not fight to the death, Xianyuan Pan's loss was not considered tragic. Xianyuan Pan was about to take the time to adjust his breath when Xianyuan Jingqing leisurely appeared in front of him. He heard the grandson of the Confucian sage say softly, "Although it is difficult to climb, it can reach Kunlun. Falling from evil is useless in Kunlun. Old ancestor, you should read those books that you think are useless. Martial arts can be cultivated from secret manuals. To reach the celestial state, it is not something that can be accumulated from hundreds or thousands of martial arts secret manuals." Xianyuan Pan said ferociously, "You think you are worthy to talk to me about principles?" Blood no longer seeped out of Xianyuan Jing Chang's 7 orifices. Instead, it flowed out. It was no longer scarlet but a shocking black. However, this Confucian scholar's expression was still calm. Xianyuan Pan swept out with his foot, and he stepped on Ancestor Huishan's knee, causing him to fall to the ground pathetically, crashing into the rain. Xianyuan Jingqing smiled and said, "Xianyuan Jingqing is talking to you. Old ancestor, you can naturally ignore it. But now that an immortal is talking to you, why are you still so arrogant and ignorant?" A thick bolt of lightning struck where Xianyuan Pan landed. Fortunately, the latter sensed it and rolled without caring about his identity, barely escaping the disaster. Xianyuan Jingqing was dumbfounded and his lips trembled. The ancient sword at Xianyuan Guiqi's waist did not dare to make any sound, fearing that it would cause an unpredictable disaster. Pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. Heaven's secrets. The more powerful a person was, the more they could manipulate heaven and earth. Xianyuan Guiqi was well aware that on the snowfield of Mount Hui, he was the one who was most likely to be affected by the aftermath of the catastrophe. Xianyuan Jingqing coughed a few times. It was supposed to be very light, but it sounded exceptionally sharp in the ears of the experts present. Xianyuan Dandan was overjoyed. His figure flashed straight away, no longer wanting to fight to the death. He only wanted to increase the distance between him and Xianyuan Jingqing, the farther the better. How could something like face compare to the most important thing, life? Xianyuan Jingqing did not chase after him. He looked at the entrance of the great snow field and did not see that familiar figure. His eyes dimmed slightly. He covered his mouth and turned to look at Xianyuan Ancestor. He asked indifferently, "Do you have any last words for the descendants of Mount Hui?" Xianyuan Pan pretended to be deep in thought to stall for time. To be honest, Su Fengnian admired Xianyuan Dandan's shamelessness. As the high and mighty ancestor of Mount Hui, he was also one of the top few figures in the entire Jianghu. However, he kidnapped people for dual cultivation and took people's wives and daughters. When he was at a disadvantage, he did not care about his status at all. Needless to say, his martial arts skills were even more impressive. Just as His Royal Highness's imagination was running wild, the middle-aged scholar called Confucian sage by the old god of swords suddenly looked over. Su Fengnian's body suddenly froze. However, for some reason, the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat ignored him. Instead, he just stared blankly at the demon-slaying platform on Mount Longhu, leaving behind a not-so-tall figure. Xianyuan Jingqing looked at His Royal Highness. He coughed and said intermittently, after dealing with the family matters, Xianyuan Jingqing will talk to Qing Feng about his martial arts experience. In the future, she will pass it on to you as a reward for His Royal Highness taking the risk to come up the mountain today. It's a pity that I won't have the chance to invite your highness to drink a pot of osmanthus wine. Qingfeng's method of warming wine is excellent. Xianyuan Jingqing looked at Su Longxiang again. There was admiration in his eyes. What a good saying. Li Bai won't be lonely anymore from the two Zen temples. Here, Xianyuan Jingqing will say one more thing. Little prince, you shouldn't enter the celestial phenomenon state so easily. After entering the celestial phenomenon state, you will be invincible. You have to know that once you enter the celestial phenomenon state, you will have to resonate with heaven and earth. An ordinary man with a jade ring will only be attacked by thieves. Su Fengnian said respectfully. Su Fengnian thanks Mr. for the guidance. Xianyuan Jingqing nodded and then said to Xianyuan Guiqi. However, he didn't turn his head to look at him. He said indifferently and calmly, Father, please leave the mountain. You can never enter the mountain again in this life. Xianyuan Guiqi was so angry that he laughed. You. At this moment, Xianyuan Jingqing was killed on the spot by the two guests behind him. Xianyuan Guiqi was stunned. Huang Fangfua had a good relationship with his son. Everyone in Mount Hui knew that they had a good relationship. But when did Hong Yu get to know Xianyuan Jingqing? Xianyuan Jingqing coughed violently. Hong Yu's martial arts cultivation today was all because of me. Xianyuan Jingqing isn't a bookworm. He wouldn't have just studied there for 20 years. Xianyuan Guiqi's heart was dead. Xianyuan Jingqing waved his hand at the two guests. Send him down the mountain. Xianyuan Guiqi was furious. He gritted his teeth and sneered. With just them. Xianyuan Jingqing smiled faintly. I knew it would be like this. Xianyuan Jingqing lowered his head and looked at his chest that was dyed red and black by blood. Dark clouds covered the sky above the snowfield. A huge and strange vortex appeared and covered the entire Mount Zhaoyao. This strange phenomenon was only a hair's breadth away from Qishuangzhen's ascension. Xianyuan Jingqing slowly knelt down and said loudly, The heavens carry thousands of phenomena, the earth carries all living things, the heavens and earth empress. Xianyuan Jingqing kneels to the heavens and earth, begging for death. Xianyuan Jingqing begs for death. Xianyuan Jingqing's voice echoed. Not to mention Mount Huanyo and Mount Huanyo, even the nearly 10,000 Taoists of Mount Longhu could hear it clearly. The heavens and earth moved. Xianyuan Guiqi's expression was almost desperate. He unsheathed his simple ancient sword and flew out of the snowfield cliff, his figure flitting away in a panic. At the same time, something poured down. It was a bolt of purple lightning. It was as thick as a mountain peak. Apart from Xianyuan Jingfeng's small piece of land, it was as if no matter how turbulent the world was, Xianyuan Jingqing, as a father, would protect a quiet and stable place before his death. The old god of swords brought Su Fengnian, Su Longxiang, and Blue Bird, who were holding umbrellas, and floated out of the snowfield. Xianyuan Pan wanted to jump off the snowfield, but was forcibly pulled back into the purple lightning pillar. Heavenly tribulation. It flashed and disappeared. On the vast snowfield, there was no sound of thunder, only wind and rain. In the end, only Xianyuan Qingfeng was left. He truly stood alone. Xianyuan Jingqing and Xianyuan Pan perished together. Not even their corpses were left. Not even ashes were left. After Xianyuan Qingfeng recovered from his daze, he let out a heart-wrenching, hoarse cry and collapsed in the rain. Su Fengnian slowly walked back to the snowfield, all sorts of feelings welling up in his heart. He saw Xianyuan Qingfeng curled up there and sobbing. Su Fengnian sighed and walked over to hold the umbrella for her. It wasn't for her, but because of what Xianyuan Jingqing had done, Su Fengnian deserved to do this for the daughter of the Confucian sage. The rain was still pouring heavily. She didn't get up, so Su Fingnian held the umbrella the whole time. The old god of swords, Li Chungang, stared at this scene with wide eyes. Then, his eyes dimmed with loneliness, reminiscence. That year, when he carried that girl up the evil slaying platform, it was also raining heavily, and he also held the umbrella. The world didn't know that this god of swords had been wronged by Qi Xianzhu. It didn't matter that the wooden horse and ox were broken, nor did it matter that he was left with only one arm. These weren't the reasons for Li Chuangong's great drop in cultivation. Even after being trapped under the tide listening pavilion for 20 years, Li Chungang still couldn't walk out of his own prison. She was already invincible in the world, so what about herself? Li Chungang remembered her face when she died. At that time, she couldn't say a single word. But now that he thought about it, wasn't it just no regrets? Li Chungang walked to the edge of the snowfield. Behind him was a man and a woman holding an umbrella, just like the scene between him and the green-robed girl. When her chest was pierced by a sword, she said with a pale smile, "If the heavens didn't give birth to you, Li Chungang, it would be boring." Li Chungang shouted, "Swords, come!" All the swordsmen of Mount Insignia unsheathed their swords and flew toward the snowfield. The Taoists of Mount Longhu unsheathed their thousands of peach-wood swords and flew toward Bull Mound. 2 waves of flying swords. They blotted out the sun. On this day, God of Swords, Li Chungang once again entered the realm of a land sword immortal. Chapter 313. Su Fingnian used to be a pauper when he was practicing the knife. He ate and drank in the golden imperial palace every day and even complained about being poor. He used the knife to move books as if he was moving mountains. Finally, his horizons were broadened. Although he heard from the white-haired old man that the flying sword beheading the head was a celestial supernatural power, he only treated it as a legend. How could he expect to witness it with his own eyes? At this moment, His Royal Highness raised his head to look at the 2 groups of flying swords that filled the sky. Staring at this scene, his scalp exploded and his blood vessels expanded. He was dumbfounded and muttered to himself, "Oh my God, I can't reward this technical work." The 2 guests who were lucky enough to escape looked at each other in shock. Xianyuan Jingqing, who entered the realm of Confucian Saint through a side door, had just been annihilated. How could there be another celestial sword? The old man who wore a tattered sheepskin coat and liked to pick his earwax was indeed the #1 swordsman in the past, Li Chungang. However, after Deng Tea appeared in the world and roamed the pugilistic world, he would occasionally make a move with the imposing manner of a half-demon half-immortal. Who would doubt that the old god of swords would be no match for the new god of swords? But the scene in front of them, forget about the hundreds of swords from Mount Huishan flying over. However, the thousands of peach-wood swords from Mount Longhu were a few miles away from the Bull Gang. Not to mention the swords of the Taoist priests in the remote Taoist temples. How could they be summoned to the great snow field by the old man's words? Didn't they say that Li Chuangong's realm dropped greatly after his arm and sword was broken? Huang Fangfua and Hong Yuang did not think highly of him even if he fought with Xianyuan Pan, let alone Wang Xianji. However, the old man who had retired from the Jianghu for 20 years had reached the realm of prophecy. How could he be so mysterious? There was a secret in the Jianghu. The Confucian saint of the 3 sects had a vast aura that connected heaven and earth. Therefore, his words contained the heavenly law. Just now, when Xianyuan Jingqing knelt to the Queen of Earth and said the words, "seeking death," it attracted the heavenly thunder that was as thick as a mountain range. The great immortal Zhenren of Taoism could make prophecies come true. Therefore, he could use the curse to kill demons and enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. Many bodhisattvas of Buddhism had great wishes and their words could shake the 3,000 worlds. Li Chuangong's means were naturally not far off. As expected of a sword immortal. Su Fingnian, who was still holding the umbrella for Xianyuan Qingfeng, muttered to himself, "This sword descends from the heavens is very domineering. If it can even kill dragons and tigers, then it'll really be awesome. Let's see if those old Taoists still dare to be cocky. The old god of swords, who was facing the demon-slaying platform with his back facing the crown prince palace, seemed to have heard Su Fingnian's nagging. His chi that was soaring into the clouds suddenly condensed, and more than 1,300 flying swords instantly fell into the cliff. He turned his head and said unhappily, "You're the only one who likes to show off. You should know that there is always someone better than you." And mountain sect. The mountains north, and this old man has long passed the age of being ruthless. Now he wants to take little Jiang as his disciple. Sigh. It's a pity I didn't see her. Otherwise, I would have a higher chance of taking her as my disciple. Su Fingnian wanted to tease the old god of swords for being useless. But he did not have the guts to do so. Su Fingnian heard about the Taoist head for the first time. He asked, "What's the Taoist head?" Li Chungang walked towards Bull Mansion and scratched his crotch. The rain was sticky and uncomfortable. He said, "The Taoist chief is the founder of Taoism and has the same status as the leader of Buddhism. It's just that this position is too hot. Those who are qualified to sit on this position have good temperament and are not willing to stand out. Those who want to be the Taoist chief are just small fries fishing for fame and compliments. Most of them are too close to the imperial court and don't have enough popularity. Therefore, in the past 100 years, except for Qi Xianzhu who deserves to be the Taoist chief, the rest of them can't be convinced by the public." As for the Buddhist sect, the white-robed monk Li Xiaoxin who traveled thousands of miles to the west to seek scriptures once had the chance to be the bodhisattva. Unfortunately, I heard that he went to get married and have a daughter. Therefore, the Taoist head and the Buddha head are empty. The reason I'm telling you this now is because this old man sensed a few peaks in Mount Longhu when he was riding his sword on the snowy plains. The Taoist from the Taoist mansion stopped him and the Taoist from Jinjuan Temple also interfered. This is not strange. What's strange is that the qi in Mount Yunjin was so abundant that it could be called fate, but it was not willing to do anything. Su Fingnian, who had been holding the umbrella to shelter Xianyuan Qingfeng from the wind and rain, gripped the handle tightly and said, "It must be that weird Taoist called Zhao Huangchao. He claimed to be a member of the Liang imperial family who entered Mount Longhu to cultivate Taoism. When I was at the sword cliff of Mount Guanglu, he performed an out-of-body act and came here on a dragon. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s. God knows if he has lived for 2 or 3 decades. This Taoist kept saying that he was enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. What a bold attitude." Su Fingnian would not elaborate on many details. After all, the battle between the dragon and the python was too obscure and mysterious. Besides, Xianyuan Qingfeng, an outsider, was present. Xianyuan Qingfeng, whose skirt was soaked in water under the umbrella, slowly came back to her senses. Her eyes were cold and emotionless. "Some time ago, I went to Mount Yunjin to look for a flood salamander. I saw a middle-aged Taoist fishing in a deep lake. At that time, I thought his cultivation was mediocre and that he was pretending to be a hermit expert. At that time, this Taoist was discussing the scriptures of the 3 sects with Song Kelly, the heir of the Song family. He was very arrogant and called Saint Zhang of the North as Teacher Zhang. It was as if he was born 2,000 years earlier and dared to sit and discuss Taoism with the saint." Li Chungang frowned. Zhao Huangchao of the 3 sects. This old man had never heard of him. Qi Xuanjin also did not mention him in the 2 times he met him. However, with this Taoist's cultivation, he was more than qualified to be the leader of the Taoists. "Young Su, how did you offend this celestial? How could you make him go astray and not hesitate to show off his dragon ride?" With this Taoist strength, he was able to live in seclusion in Mount Longhu for at least 100 years without making a name for himself. He was clearly not the kind of person who liked fame. His surname was Xiao and he was from the Son of Heaven. Ha, this old man understood. He was just concerned about the gathering and dispersing of the world's fate. Based on this, you should be grateful that Chao Chongqing took Jiang girl away early. Otherwise, if Xiao Huangchao saw you and saw through the mystery, you would be in serious trouble. At Mount Guanglu, with this old man's ability at that time, it would be useless even if he opened the gate of heaven. Su Fengnian smiled mischievously. So now. Chapter 314. The old man scolded, "Does this old man have nothing better to do than to stand up for you? Do you think fighting with celestial beings is a small matter? Celestial beings, dragon spirit travel, profound fate." Xianyuan Qingfeng felt a chill run down her spine. She used to be an arrogant and stubborn woman born in the most powerful family in the martial arts world, the only daughter of the first wife, and had a photographic memory. She could be counted as a small arsenal. Only the son of a top scholarly family like Song Kelly, who had real talent, could slightly subdue her. However, ever since this umbrella holder entered Jianzhou, her entire life had been turned upside down. Her father had died just after showing off his celestial being style. The three people of the generation with the surname Jing, who were supposed to support Mount Hui's prestige for the next 50 years, were all dead. Xianyuan Dandan, who used to be a pillar of the sea, was killed. Her grandfather, Xianyuan Guiqi, was forced to jump off a mountain, and two guests turned against her on the snowy plains. If her father was here, they could still behave, but now, there was not even half a grandmaster left in Mount Hui. How could she control those guests of sacrifice who looked like monkeys when the tree did not fall, and who looked like wolves when the tree fell? Su Fengnian saw that this woman had no intention of getting up. Was she addicted to sitting on the ground? Xianyuan Qingfeng, you can't always make me hold the umbrella. Now that the bull gang is without a leader, it's the best time for you to show your ambition. Don't waste it. Xianyuan Qingfeng was speechless. Xianyuan Qingfeng struggled to get up. Perhaps because he had been sitting for too long, his legs were sore, and he was about to fall back into the water. Su Fengnian tried to support him out of goodwill, but Xianyuan Qingfeng used all of her strength to push him away. She sneered, "Is it my ambition, or does your highness want to control Mount Huishan Xianyuan?" Su Fengnian sneered and said shamelessly, "Let's not beat around the bush. I like it. Since you're the one who started the conversation, why don't we have a good plan?" Xianyuan Qingfeng refused to back down. "Please speak," he said. The old god of swords ignored the scheming between the man and woman and walked straight to bold descending manner. He walked up the steps and bent down to pick up the string of wind chimes. Su Fengnian spoke in a methodical manner, "You're just worried that this Shitzi will take over the magpie's nest and use you as a puppet. You'll only stop when I've emptied Mount Hui's hundreds of years of wealth, right?" Xianyuan Qingfeng said without hesitation, "That's right. Your Highness has a good family background and high standards. I believe your appetite will not be small." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Xianyuan Qingfeng, oh Xianyuan Qingfeng, I don't mind telling you this. As long as you take the copies of those secret manuals into the Tide Listening Pavilion in Beiliang, I don't want anything else. Since we're doing business on the surface and I've accepted your benefits, I'll naturally help you secure your position as the head of Mount Hui. If anyone isn't convinced, you can let them have a taste of Beiliang's blade. Besides, the old god of swords is already a swordsman of the present era. It doesn't matter if you're a fox exploiting the tiger's might or taking advantage of others. Who would dare say no? Even if you don't want to stay in Mount Hui, no one will come into direct conflict with you. This is a business. Whether you're comfortable as the head of Mount Hui or not will depend on your own methods. When the time comes, if you need me to take action, you'll have to give me other benefits. When doing business, even blood brothers have to settle accounts clearly. What's more, we're enemies, aren't we?" Xianyuan Qingfeng said coldly, "Your Highness also said that we're enemies. Then what business are we doing?" If worse comes to worst, Xianyuan Qingfeng will just go all out and leave this mess to my brothers. What's wrong with me leaving the mountain? Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and said, that's no fun. Your father, Xianyuan Jingqing, risked his life to create this situation. With your stubborn personality, how can you let it go? Who are you trying to fool? I'm not in the mood to beat around the bush with you. To put it bluntly, Mount Hui is in turmoil right now. If it weren't for the fact that I admire your father's actions, I wouldn't be so polite with a petty woman like you. Why would I stand here and hold an umbrella for you? Apart from your good skills in a fit of pique, what other skills do you have to show me? If you really piss me off, how hard would it be to support a puppet who's willing to be a lackey? Bailiang's hat of His Royal Highness isn't small, is it? Coincidentally, the few people that can't be suppressed by this hat are all dead. Su Fengnian observed Xianyuan Qingfeng's expression and said patiently, the bull gang can't beat the Dao Court's Mount Longhu in the first place. Now that you don't have me to back you up, won't you be suppressed for a few decades until you can't breathe? Besides, I'm Bailiang in the end. Aren't I going to leave soon? Once I leave, what are you worried about? If that's the case, then you're too useless. To tell the truth, the reason why I'm willing to let bygones be bygones and help you get promoted is because of that wooden sword Wenhua. He said that he'll use his sword to slap your little buttocks red when he learns superior swordsmanship. But once you leave the family, Wenhua won't go so far as to make things difficult for an ordinary woman with a miserable background. This prince won't be able to watch a good show. How boring. Xianyuan Qingfeng walked out of the umbrella and ignored Wenhua's teasing. He only asked, miserable. Su Fengnian asked back, what do you think? Xianyuan Qingfeng asked, are you pitying me? Su Fengnian didn't answer and only handed the umbrella to her. Seeing that she didn't move, he simply placed the umbrella on her shoulder and looked up at the dusky rain. If Wenhua were here, he'd definitely say that the heavens are pissing again. How naughty. Xianyuan Qingfeng was stunned. At this time, Hongyu took a few steps forward and got down on one knee. Young miss, from today onwards, Hongyu is at your beck and call. Huang Fangfua said with a smile, I only want to continue studying at Mount Insignia and hope to reach Brother Jingqing's level one day. Whoever makes an enemy of young miss is also an enemy of mine. Xianyuan Qingfeng was stunned and didn't say anything. A loud voice came from the celestial master residence of Mount Longhu. Since Sword Godly has borrowed a sword and left, do you dare return it? Li Chungang, who was sizing up Feng Ling, couldn't be bothered to respond. Next, Xianyuan Qingfeng inadvertently saw His Royal Highness winking at the old sword god and mouthing two words. After seeing this, Li Chungang rolled his eyes and blurted out an extremely vulgar word in the direction of Mount Longhu. Bullshit. If that was all, Xianyuan Qingfeng wouldn't have done anything. What the old man who had become a terrestrial sword immortal said next was truly domineering. That's what Su Fengnian said. Xianyuan Qingfeng immediately smiled through his tears. Chapter 315. If Li Chungang said fart to the Taoist master's residence, outsiders would only say that the old god of swords' heroic spirit was still the same as before, especially after entering the threshold of earth immortal. They were full of confidence and could regard Li Chungang as an immortal swordsman. However, if it was Su Fengnian who said it, it would be a different story. Two great masters were fighting each other in the great snow plains and the Taoist ancestral court, Longhu Mountain. Even if it was just a battle of words, it was still full of elegance. What was His Royal Highness doing? Su Fengnian could already imagine that for a long time, the whole Jianghu would become a big joke. Xianyuan Qingfeng, who was at a disadvantage in the scheming against His Royal Highness, could not help but gloat. She finally had some spirit and was no longer lifeless and haggard. Su Fengnian glared at her and took the lead to walk to the great snow plains. Su Longxiang and Blue Bird followed closely behind. Xianyuan Qingfeng hesitated for a moment, then walked slowly in the rain with Huang Fangfua and Hong Yuang. Hong Yuang was expressionless. Huang Fangfua thought a lot in this short section of the road in the rain. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the second foreign minister. Hong Yuang had always had a good reputation for his conduct and conduct. Not just anyone could claim the title of ancient style. Hong Yuang, as a foreign minister of Mount Huishan who came from a poor background, was not humble in front of others. This caused Xianyuan Qingfeng to treat him with respect. In private, Hong Yuang was called training a hawk instead of raising a dog. Hong Yuang was also not overbearing and never showed any complacency. However, no matter how Xianyuan Jingqing secretly supported and cultivated Hong Yu these years, it was still Xianyuan Jingqing who brought him to the mountain. This time, Hong Yu betrayed him on the great snow plains and killed his benefactor Xianyuan Jingqing together. Huang Fangfo was shocked at that time. If this matter spread out, it would almost destroy Hong Yu's reputation for half of his life. If he was not careful, he would be labeled as a traitor. Huang Fangfo sneered in his heart. You, Hong Yu, can betray Xianyuan Jinggong's second branch today. Will you betray your new master's first branch in the future? Hong Yu suddenly said. Hong Yu has something to tell Mississippi. Xianyuan Qingfeng nodded. Hong Tuo's tone was calm as he said, back then, before Hong Tuo went up the mountain, he was actually secretly invited by brother Yu Jingqing. That was why he made the decision to come to Mount Hui. Otherwise, with Hong Yu's experience and ability, he definitely wouldn't have the courage to come to the bull gang and become a laughingstock. Huang Fangfo narrowed his eyes. Xianyuan Qingfeng felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and the knot in his heart was untied. He turned his head and smiled. Uncle Hong, you've suffered all these years. Hong Yu lowered his head and cupped his hands. That's how it should be. Hong Yu raised his head and looked directly at the young woman who was about to take control of Mount Hui. He said, but Hong Yu has received many favors from Emperor Xianyuan. Please treat the children of the second branch well. Xianyuan Qingfeng said softly, Uncle Hong, don't worry. Qingfeng isn't a narrow-minded woman. It's a fact that the second branch is powerful. Blindly purging dissidents will only cause the turbulent Mount Hui to fall apart. Qingfeng will do my best to appease the second and third branches. I won't change any of the established rules. Guests can stay if they wish, but leave if they don't. Even if they leave the bull gang today, Mount Hui will still welcome heroes from all walks of life to come up the mountain again. The grudges of my father's generation with the surname Jing, as well as those above him, will completely end today. If the other two branches cause trouble, Qingfeng can promise you twice, but not thrice. At that time, if they still refuse to let it go, then don't blame Qingfeng for being ruthless. Xianyuan Qingfeng spoke lightly, but Huang Fangfo felt much more at ease. He was afraid that this woman would become arrogant and start a massacre in Mount Hui. When that time came, who would be the executioners? Wouldn't it be him and Hong Yu? Moreover, in this way, he would have no room to maneuver and would be completely tied to her. This was originally a common method of controlling people. Logically speaking, it made sense. However, Huang Fangfo looked down on Xianyuan Qingfeng. Being in charge of a century-old aristocratic family was a strenuous job that could shake mountains and topple peaks. She only knew how to play petty tricks and was no different from a shrew with a loose tongue. She wasn't worthy of Huang Fangfo's loyalty. The most troublesome part was that Xianyuan Qingfeng's martial strength wasn't worth mentioning. Once the heir of Beiliang left, the more they suppressed her, the more likely it would be for him and Hong Yu when she rebounded in the future. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to suppress her even if they used all their skills. Walking to the entrance of the Bull Gang mansion, Su Fengyan stood under the eaves to shelter from the rain and looked back at the snowy plains. Xianyuan Qingfeng stood nearby. She tilted her head and smoothed out a few strands of hair that stuck to her cheek. She remained silent. The wind and rain gradually stopped. A young man with delicate features walked out of the mansion. Seeing everyone, he respectfully said to Xianyuan Qingfeng, "Yesterday, First Master gave me 4 brocade pouches. He said that after the rain stopped today, they would be given to His Royal Highness, and 2 esteemed guests." Xianyuan Qingfeng was slightly surprised. Huang Fangfua and Hong Yu's expressions were especially solemn. Although they were serious, they weren't surprised. Clearly, this wasn't the first time they had received the brocade pouches. In fact, killing Xianyuan Jingqing on the snowy plains was a request for the brocade pouches. Huang and Hong didn't know beforehand that the other party had truly surrendered to Xianyuan Jingqing. Xianyuan Qingfeng and the other 2 received the brocade pouches from the young man. Huang Fangfua and Hong Yu immediately excused themselves and left the snowy plains. The 2 esteemed guests didn't exchange even half a word of pleasantries. Huang Fangfua returned to the small building. He returned a clean set of robes and personally burned incense. He took out the small scroll hidden in the brocade pouch. After repeatedly reading it, he gently tossed it into the red sandalwood incense burner. He smiled and murmured, "Brother Jingqing really didn't disappoint me." There were only a dozen or so words written on the exquisitely cut paper. It was just like what Xianyuan Jingqing usually said when he talked about writing. Zhong Yi had said that simplicity was the end of poetry. "Brother Huang, please stay in Mount Hui for 10 years and you can enter the Finger Xian realm." Huang Fangfua first smiled and then laughed out loud. "Xianyuan Jingqing, oh Xianyuan Jingqing, are you asking me to work for your daughter for 10 years? Since you said you could help me enter the Finger Xian realm, don't mention 10 years, I can even wait 20 years. After laughing, Huang Fangfua decided to study at Bull Hill for another 10 years. He believed that with Xianyuan Jingqing's meticulous planning, even if he couldn't enter the Finger Xian realm after reading all the secret manuals, Huang Fangfua was sure that another brocade pouch would appear at that time to solve his doubts. Huang Fangfua didn't even bother to think about who had the brocade pouch that he might not need in 10 years. With Xianyuan Jingqing's meticulous mind, he was afraid that Huang Fangfua wouldn't be able to find it even if he turned the entire Bull Hill upside down. When the time was not right, the mysteries of heaven would not be revealed. Huang Fangfua sighed, "Brother Jingqing, what a Confucian sage." Huang Fangfua is fascinated. Hong Piao had never stayed in the luxurious abode of the guest of Mount Hui. It was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Therefore, he chose to live in a secluded bamboo house on the mountainside. After opening the brocade pouch, his forehead was oozing with cold sweat. The general meaning of the brocade pouch was far less soul-stirring than the one given to Huang Fangfua. It was just that Xianyuan Jingqing kindly reminded Hong Piao. If Qingfeng had any grudges against Hong Piao for killing Xianyuan Jingqing, he could say that Hong Piao was invited by Xianyuan Jingqing to come up the mountain. Hong Piao, who was kneeling in front of the bamboo tea table, clenched his fists so tightly that the veins on the back of his hands popped out. When he, Hong Piao, went up to Mount Hui, it naturally had nothing to do with Xianyuan Jingqing. At that time, what he said on the snowy plains was just an idea he came up with on the spur of the moment. He played an unknown trick to eliminate Xianyuan Qingfeng's vigilance. Therefore, although this brocade pouch seemed to be a kind reminder, wasn't it also a kind of warning? Hong Piao took a deep breath and raised his head to look out the window. He smiled, "Brother Jingqing is indeed an immortal." Hong Piao is completely convinced. The bull landed under the eaves. Su Fengnian looked at the rainbow stretching across the sky. One end of the rainbow was on the snowy plains, and the other end was on the Taoist master's residence. The scenery was absolutely beautiful. Su Fengnian opened the brocade pouch and was stunned. The words written on it were concise and to the point. "His Royal Highness only needs to ask my daughter for a copy of the Aspiring Tripod Pavilion Spring and Autumn Annals from my life. There is a letter in the envelope." At the end, there was even a sentence that went straight to the point. His Royal Highness did not let her down, and Mount Hui would not let His Royal Highness down. Xianyuan Qingfeng leaned against a pillar, his eyes hazy with tears. Hong Piao is rebellious and needs Qingfeng to convince him with force. It's better to use force than to show kindness. When Mount Hui is peaceful, he can be raised. When there is chaos, he must be killed. Huang Fong has a good reputation. I have my own plans. Within 10 years, this person will not have any disloyalty. After 10 years, if he wants to make a name for himself, there will naturally be someone to suppress him. I left a book for the Daoist children of Mount Longhu to give to your grandfather. Qingfeng, you don't have to worry about this matter. If Su Fengnian has endless evil intentions and wants a yard after taking an inch, you can go and find the Daoist who fishes for flood salamanders in Mount Yunjin. This immortal elder owes me a favor and has promised me to come out once. If Su Fengnian does not overdo it, this person can work together to seek benefits. During the Qingming festival, if your mother is unwilling to visit the grave, Qingfeng need not force her. Since we can't help each other in times of need, it is already a blessing in life to forget each other. Since the day you were born, I have buried a jar of wine under an old cassia tree. From then on, I have 1 jar every year. Now, I have 23 jars. How about privately naming your daughter Hong? Don't blame me for nagging. It's just that I haven't been able to talk to you all these years. In the future, my grandson will be called Fuyao, and my granddaughter will be called Yasong. How about it? All these years, I have been flipping through ancient books when I have nothing to do. I have 100 headaches, but I still can't think of a satisfactory name. I hope that in the future, if they want to study, then they can study. If they want to practice martial arts, then they can practice martial arts. The world is vast, but they can only stand on a small piece of land. Life is bitter and short. It's only 100 years, 36,500 days. Once you read it, destroy it. Remember, remember. Su Fengnian watched as Xianyuan Qingfeng swallowed the paper in the brocade pouch. What a heartless woman. In the quiet courtyard of the eldest son's house, that woman also received a brocade pouch. However, the paper was completely blank.